Lord, we want to thank you for this day. We want to thank you because you have called us together. We want to thank you that we have confidence for very good and many varied reasons in the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ. And I want to thank you for Rachel. I want to thank you for her friendship, for the leadership she exercises, for the clarity with which she expresses her commitment to you, and for the gift that she is to our church across the nation in these days. And I pray now that she would know that sense of your Holy Spirit equipping and enabling and empowering her to speak from your heart to us this day. Pray that you bless her in the process and bless us through her words and through her being. In Jesus' name. Amen.
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 Fabulous. I'll just grab my phone and my thingy. So, that was a great introduction. Ooh. You know a little bit more about me. So I've come from London today. I have to say, I was going to put the big smoke. But I live in East London, near Liverpool Street, so central East London, and that's where the Hope office now is, in the basement of the house in which I live. And I'm married to a church planter, and we're in the HTB family. So not just talk, also practice. Always sometimes a bit of a stretch, but I'm talking to a whole pile of leaders here in churches, so you totally understand about the impossibility of the stretch. From like trying to, when people are contacting you, but you're also sort of trying to do something else at the same time. So you'll get that. So, but just so that you know that I don't talk from theory, I also am rooted in practice. We live in sort of community with 4 other people who live in our house, and we have a lot of people through our home. Often cooking for vast numbers of people. I just bought a new 40-person rice cooker. I highly recommend it. So I can give you top tips on that as well. So the large rice cooker means cooking for lots of people. Have you got a 50 people rice cooker? Yeah, it's revolutionary, isn't it? Just press the switch and suddenly you've got rice for that many people. So really helpful. So that's kind of just a little bit about me. And I've always been passionate that people might come to know Jesus from my earliest days. Jesus has been my best friend, and it makes sense to me that everybody else meets my best friend. So that's just part of, I think, who I am. I don't know if you've ever... if you ever had something, you thought that you were living in a world and you thought that you understood everything, and then something changes. So the other day I was looking for a book to read because my husband is an avid book reader. And so before the lights go out, he likes to just be quiet and be reading his book. I mean, I always thought when you got married to have a chat, which is what I used to do with my sister, because we shared a room all our lives. So we loved it. We, diagnosed the day, chatted for ages. We had lots to say. I really missed her when she moved out. So when I got married, I thought, this is great. I am going to have that person to end of day, have a great chat with. Well, I got that wrong. Because his end of day is I'd like to quietly read a book and not be disturbed. So he's got his and he's reading away. And I'm like, finish my book. Oh, where's there a book? Oh, what book? I can't find a book. So I start scurrying around, throwing books away. It's like, what are you doing? Looking for my book. Oh, I know, my sister-in-law, she gave me a book at Christmas. Where's that? I potter off out of the room, start looking for the Christmas present box, which I haven't quite completely unpacked yet, to be true, still haven't unpacked. Maybe I'll get it unpacked by the next Christmas. Anyway, so I'm looking around, can I find a book? Oh, I don't know, I don't like this book. Is there a book on the shelf that I could reread? Get back into bed. And he's like, where is your Kindle? Oh yeah, Kindle. So I'm living in the world of the paperback book. I still love a paperback book. And if I need a paperback book, if there isn't one in the house, at 10:30 at night, I'm done, aren't I? I can't even get one ordered. They don't bring those at Deliveroo. So I'm a bit stuck. I could probably get one Prime Amazon for the next day, but for that particular moment, I'm done. That is the end of book options. All I've got for my book options are the ones that are here in hard copy. And so I was living in that old world, in that old narrative. And my husband's like, what is she doing? There is a Kindle. And on that Kindle are limitless options of books that I could read. In fact, the choice is overwhelming. You've got a different problem then, haven't you? You get out the Kindle and you're like, oh my word, now I've got thousands of options. Which book shall I read? But I was living in paperback novel world, and he is happily living in tablet Kindle world. But sometimes we do this with other areas of our lives, and one of them is around the confidence in the gospel. One of them is in what is happening outside the church. So we can still be living in paperback world when the church has actually moved on and is in Kindle world. And that is something of what the Talking Jesus research, which I'm going to help you understand today, has actually shown us. That we have been living in the paperback world, but there is a whole new thing going on that we didn't even realise. And I'm going to ask you something else. I'm going to just have a little look in Matthew chapter 9, if you're with me. Starting at verse 35. And Jesus went throughout all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction. And when he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. And then he said to his disciples, we know this line, the harvest is, but it's the labourers are few. Therefore, pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out labourers into his harvest. So just for a few moments, if you had to pause and think, what would you say about the harvest where you are? How would you describe the harvest field where you are? Would you call it hard soil? Just to like, you could maybe chat to the person next to you. Yeah, chat to the person next to you. What is the soil like where you are? Emily, so sorry, but your laptop's switched off. I'm not sure how to keep it on. So we swapped. Maybe if you put it on. Pardon? Yeah. Just maybe put it onto slideshow because I think it will think it's doing something. I think. Is there one way you can do it with the bung and the next one along? Use presenter view. Next to that one, yeah. Great. Perfect. No. It's just something else. Great. So even that's a good, interesting start, isn't it? So I get to travel a lot around different parts of the UK, and it's really interesting hearing people, getting them to reflect on where they are. What is the ground like where they are? Is the harvest plentiful or is it poor? Is the ground hard or is it not? And actually, it's beginning to, there's some different narratives just beginning to come in. So even over the last month or so, there's just a bit of a change in the air about the narrative as to what's happening. But this is something probably we picked up. So this change in narrative is something that we began to see in the Talking Jesus research when we did it in February 2022, that we're beginning to hear played back just. Whereas when we first went out with this, the narrative was the narrative was paperback, and now I'm beginning to hear a bit more actually of this wider scope. So we're going to have a look at whether the words of Jesus are still true on this particular theme, and we're going to look at that from research. So I love research. I find it really helpful. This research was originally done, we did it in 2015 and we did it in 2022. Did any of you hear it in 2015? Probably. I don't know if any of you picked it up in 2022. Some of you might have done. And so we're going to have a little look at that. And we did it originally for a denominational leaders summit. We took them this research, none of them believed it in 2015. And so we had to redo it on a much bigger scale. So we just started on the bigger scale this time. But interestingly, I feel that having done a lot of talking and speaking about it in 2015, now doing it in 22, I can see that people are beginning to change the conversation, which is really exciting because things are moving. And so it's almost like it's becoming more part of the culture, which is exciting. And you'll understand why as we go through. So it's called Talking Jesus. And we did this the original one was 2015. We did it with the same companies. You have to keep as many parameters exactly the same if you want to track. So we did it in the same way with the same company, the same process, so that we can also compare and contrast. So we can look at 2015, we can look at 2022, and we'll do it again in 5 years' time. It was 7 years because of the pandemic, it wasn't going to work. So we did it as we came out of the pandemic. And we'll do it again in another 5 years' time. The original partners were the Hope Together, the EA, and the Church of England. I was working for the Church of England at that time. I was their national lead for mission and evangelism. And now the partners, we've had bigger partners this time. We've had Alpha, Kingsgate, Lewis Palau, CV Global, EA, and ourselves, Hope Together, but not the Church of England this time. So we've had a wider breadth of partners, though, to do this this time. So what did we do? We did I'm pressing this as if it's going to come up, and it's not, is it? Next slide. We did a 10-minute survey online with 4,000 UK adults, but the actual sample size is about 3,000. 1,000 is good enough for a weighted sample. 3,000 gives me a little bit more flexibility so that I've been able to break out Wales, Northern Ireland, Scotland, so some of the population. The South is all in one big group, and the South is there's nothing distinct. The South as a whole comes out like England and like the UK as a whole, so there's nothing too much there to point out. But actually, when you do, I'd love to do 30,000 people, because then I would be actually able to I'd be able to look at Bristol and the South. I would be able to give you much better detail and information. So maybe next time we could raise the pot, to raise the bar, because it's becoming of more value to people, to get the granular detail. And then there is a boost sample. This extra sample is because some of the questions, and I'll explain this group of practicing Christians, some of the answers that they gave people wanted to know more about that group, and so we did a specific big sample of them. But that big sample of them is not in the big data set for the UK because it would completely sway it. So the data set for the UK is that 3,115 adults, and that is weighted by geography, it's weighted by gender, by ethnicity, gender, and region to make the soup of the UK, which means that you can sort of break it down when there's a big enough population. And it's a 1.54% margin of error, which would be about normal when we're doing research. So we're not going to go to the line on any of these stats. Great, all still with me? Good. Why did we do it? So when I worked for the Church of England, I used to think if I was the head of marketing, so sort of the lead on mission evangelism for the Church of England, had a bit of a marketing edge to it. If I was the head of marketing in Boots, on my desk on a Monday morning would be all the stats from every store over the weekend. I'd know what was happening where, how many people had gone through the doors, what was my best-selling product. I'd know when that shifted, I'd know when that changed. I'd also know what my competitors were doing. I'd know what Super Savers was doing, and I'd know what Superdrug were doing. I'd know what people felt about the word Boots and whether there was an allegiance to something like that name. I'd be able to do all of that sort of research, and it would all arrive on my desk on a Monday morning. And there I was working for the Church of England, and I'd be lucky if I got the October returns a year after, which by that time, what use are they? And when you talk to people about doing them, sometimes it's just a finger in the air, roughly speaking, we think. So just nothing, and they were very internal focused. Not much helped me at all. How can you make a strategy from that? You really can't. There's nothing of weight there to help you. And it was only focused on the people who arrived. What I was interested in, all the people who hadn't yet arrived. What's happening out there? What do those people think? They're the ones I want to reach. They're the harvest field, and I've got no data on them. So I wanted to know, what did people outside the church think about Jesus? Like, how far away from me are they? What is the level of reach that I need? Are there, because sometimes when you read the newspapers, there's 3 of us left. 3 Christians left. We live in Portsmouth. We're age 85, and the final church of the whole of the UK is closing next week. I mean, sometimes that's what you feel when you read a newspaper article, although I believe it's beginning to change, so that's really interesting. You know what I'm saying? There's a wind of change. Even in the press, there's a wind of change just at the moment that we're just beginning to pick up, which is interesting. They're being warmer towards this, but they have been colder, shall we say. Maybe there's been a change in the wind, which is really interesting. So if you look at some of the more latest articles and things that are coming out, you're beginning to see that they're giving us a slightly better press. But that's what I wanted to know. What does the average person in the streets, for example, round this church, think about Jesus? Do they know anybody who's a Christian, a practicing active Christian? Just all of those things will change the way that I think about how we're going to do mission evangelism. And is the harvest plentiful, or quite frankly, not there at all? And what do I believe about it? So am I still scurrying around the bedroom looking for a paperback? Or actually, is there a whole Kindle world that I just haven't realised because I just didn't ask the questions? Does that make sense? So that's where this came from. So the first thing I want to look at is the state of faith in the UK. Did any of you look at the census data? Yeah, and did you find that really useful even for your neighbourhood? So you can get loads out of the census. It's great fun. But the census, can any of you remember the big headline for the census? What was the big headline for the census data? Yeah, Christians are under 50%. We all know the census headline data. We know that headline. That's what they went for. It felt like another withering moment for the church. We've dropped under 50%, decline of the church, what's happening in the UK, la, la, la. We knew that was coming because we'd seen it when we did this in February 22, so we knew we dipped, and that is a dip since 2015. Muslim were a bit under, that probably should be 5, over the whole nation it's around 5-6% of people who are Muslim. But again, if you think about the noise, the ratio of noise sometimes, how can I put this? Per percentage of the population, we don't necessarily get that. That's not weighted on the actual representation in our country. And I'm saying that with care and caution. So I don't want to be, but that's not, a massive complaint. I'm just saying that's important for people in our churches. So when we're, because otherwise you can think this is an equal situation, but it isn't. It is where I live, because I live in a Muslim heartland, and that's far. There a lot of those people are our neighbours, but it's not so probably where you are. That's not going to be your main mission field. And then the other religions are actually very small and really only come into play in a few specific areas of the country. So it is not the big thing for most of the country that we're dealing with. Then we have the atheists and the none of the above. They're sort of more of the new growing category. So that's where the people who are not ticking Christian are more likely to be turning up. Does that make sense? That's where that changeover is happening, particularly with the concept of none of the above. That's I'm just not religious. But I don't know if you've looked at Theos, have got a great report on this. And it's not that they're not spiritual. So a third of the people who say they're none of the above would be spiritual people. They're just not religious people. So again, that doesn't mean an outright no. It's a change in mission field. It's a change in a group of people that I need to reach. And what's happening with this drop in Christian? What's really going on there? So the younger you go in the population, the more this drops off. The older you go in the population, the more people will tick that they're Christian. So if you look at the 65 plus category, it's a lot bigger. And I think it's, forgotten my sheet, with when you go into the 18 to 24-year-olds, we're down at sort of around 30% of people who would say they're Christian. So that means that this news will carry on being news. Every time we do something like a census, it will continue to drop. What does that mean for us as a church? What's actually happening? Do we have 48% of those people in church on Sunday? No. So that's actually, it's not a measure of the church. It's a measure of something else. It's a change in mission field, because somebody who's got cultural allegiance to the Christian faith is a different mission field to somebody who is none of the above. But it isn't about decline of the church. So how would we measure the church? Because that's the bit so I've got two interests. I've got those outside the church, and we'll dig a little bit deeper into those. But what about the size and scale of the team? So when Jesus says the labourers are few, how many of those have we got? So again, if I was working for Boots, I'd know the size of my Salesforce team. But it's a really hard measure to measure. Across every denomination in the UK, what is the scale of the church? Oh, interesting question. So we had to work out how we could measure that, and how we could measure that with a poll. So I'm not going to go and interview 48% of the population and then work out whether I think they're an active or practicing Christian. I had to do something really quite simple. And so what we did is we looked at three measures. We looked at whether they're part of a worshipping community regularly. Regular is now, statistically speaking, once a month. Who knew? When we grew up, I think we went 5 times on a Sunday, didn't we? And 3 times in the week. That was regular. We were in the Brethren. And so things have changed since then. So we looked at that. Who was at least once a month? But actually, a good number of those people are weekly attendance. And then I looked at 2 other factors. We looked at prayer. Who is praying at least weekly? And then the final one, which absolutely is the one that cuts this down, is this. Who actually reads this? That's when you really get a measure for your scale of your team. So, and you'll know probably even in your churches, there might not be people who read this every day. So we know that for certain. So who is actually reading the Bible? And we looked at weekly. So who is either reading or listening to the Bible weekly, who is praying weekly, and who is part of a worshipping community at least monthly. And we looked at them, and we then labelled them as practicing Christians. So, I keep on pressing a button. You're going to have to jump to slide 8 for me, Emily, and then we're going to come back. Sorry, I haven't got control over the thing. So we're going to go to slide 8, and then we're going to come back to some other slides. So about 6% of the UK population meet that criteria. They are regularly part of a worshipping community. They are reading their Bibles and they're praying. And you're like, oh my word, what have you just done? But there is some good news around this figure. This figure has remained stable since 2015, even though we've been through a pandemic. Another piece of research that I did showed that the people who were staying in church, who survived the pandemic, were those who had good spiritual practices. So the people who read their Bibles and prayed stayed and made it through the pandemic. And the people who left were the people without those spiritual practices, because we literally did a piece of research to look at that. And so they've stayed with us. There's another really interesting piece. There is no missing generation in this 6%. So in this 6%, it holds level across every generational cohort. So in each generational cohort, there is the same percentage as the right percentage of them for their percentage in the population. We have an ageing population in the UK, so we actually have more, we're growing older, not younger, but for their generational cohort, there are enough 18 to 24-year-olds to make this hold true all the way across. Does that make sense? So that's really good news. So there's two pieces of good news since 2015. Number one, the Church of Jesus Christ, when it comes to the active and practicing Christians, has not declined. And number two, there is no missing generation when you measure active and practicing Christians. Yes?
Do that again, just describe that specifically.
The generational piece. So across the whole population, say, and this is just to example it, say 10% of the whole population are aged 18 to 24. This is going to work really badly. Then 6% of them would be active practicing Christians. And so it's basically, it holds up. You pull out all the different generational cohorts, and you can see that percentage, there is a distinct percentage of them that are practicing Christians. So we're not missing them. So we've thought that they were missing. They are missing from the big cultural Christianity. That's a real drop. Less and less of young adults are saying, I'm a Christian, if they are not an active or practicing Christian. It's still there, that idea of cultural Christianity, but less so than it was. But when you come to those who are active and practicing, the same number of those across the percentage of those across every generation is there. So basically, we're not declining when it comes to active practicing Christians across all denominations, and we have not got a missing generation. And that's really important for us to get our heads round, because those two things show that there's real hope for the church, because these are the team. These are the people who come, are in it, on it, praying, reading their Bibles. They are the ones that are going to keep the church alive. And then in that, in the big drop of Christian, that 48%, there's that 6% who are like this. And then there is a whole breakdown of other degrees of Christian faith. So some of those people in that 48%, they will be coming to church irregularly. They'll be coming every 3 months. You know who they are. They certainly haven't got a Bible reading pattern. You know who they are. And then you've got others in that group who come twice a year. They come at Easter and Christmas. And then you've got some in that group who never go to church, never pray, never read their Bibles. But they still tick that they're Christian, because when they hit hospital, that's what they tick on the form. And they will be more likely to be of an older age bracket. So that's that huge spectrum of which we can rely on 6%. 6% of the UK we can rely upon, and that has held up even through a pandemic. It's stayed stable, it's stayed strong, and it's across every generation. So the Church of Jesus Christ is not in decline. Cultural Christianity is in decline. And that just means it's a change in mission field, but not a church in decline. So that's really important for us. So that is just, but the newspapers are never going to get any of that. So we're not going to read that or pick that up in the newspapers. Some of the, we can flick this. We're going to go to slide, we're going to go to slide 7 and look at population by region for you. So where are we? We would say we're southwest, wouldn't we, here? So just some things for you to note. You've got 10% of all the 65 pluses live in the southwest. About 7% of all the 18 to 24-year-olds live in the southwest. And about 8% of the whole UK live in the southwest. Just to help you kind of have a little look at what you're doing. And so you can see that you might have a slightly different makeup to what we've got in London, and that's okay. Basically, if you go into the census data, you'll be able to get this in much greater detail. You'll be able to get your area. So you go into if you go into the census, you could actually find out two really important things for your local neighbourhood. You can find out the age demographic of your area. So look at it's really nicely color coded. So you can work out whether where you are in your patch that you have got a heart for and a call for, what the age brackets are. Really important if you're going to have a strategy for mission. Let's work out who's here that we could reach. And you then look at your church and work out if there's a group that's missing, because you can work out if they're actually in your community. The other thing you can do is, going back to the slide 5, you can also, from your data on the census, you can work out this breakdown. You can work out how many people are Christian, and you can work out how many people are of another religion, and you can work out how many people are none of the above. And so I've done that, and sometimes when I'm going somewhere, I open up the census data, and I can look at the colours. So dark blue is none of the above. I can also see that, so our rich neighbours, I don't even see this. Most of them would be in that none of the above. They're just not. They're in the non category. I can also see that for where some of our rich leaders live, like in London. So you can just tell where you've got pockets of where people of the same worldview live. But if you go out of that, so I looked, for example, at Basingstoke or Bracknell Way, I could see a much greater spread of what people believed, which is really interesting and helpful. So you can literally dive into the census data and you can pull for your community literally what everybody thinks, door to door. That's quite helpful, isn't it? So you can work out what yes. Yeah, so we were on slide 7, this one. Yeah. So they're two really useful tools for the census that will give you much greater detail than this. This is like a huge, big brushstroke, but dig into the census because you can find out what your community is like. It's a real gift to the church. Great. Still with me? Good. Okay. So, and then we have then we've got this 6% team, which is the slide 8. So 6% of team that we've now worked out. And then this huge non-practicing Christian bracket that we know is, that's got a gradient of belief and faith in there. It's got a whole different set of targets of how we're going to move those people into practicing Christians. Does that make sense? Some of them never come to church, some of them come only annually, and some come every 3 months, and some come every month but have never picked up their Bible. And you've got, as pastors and leaders, you've got a whole gradient of approach. And then we've got the non-Christians, which is 52% of the UK who'd say they're non-Christian. And these ones we're going to have a deep dive in, because these are the ones we want to reach these people with the good news of Jesus. So let's find out a little bit more about them. So one of the gifts to the church is just the next slide, slide 9. One of the gifts to the church has been the ethnic mix. That's what's changed some of the results in places where we have that gift. So, for example, the black majority church, if you go into the 18 to 24-year-olds, you can see the gift they are to the UK church. So many more of them have come through and been discipled well, and they are, like I said, they're batting way above their weight. So for the percentage of that group within the population, many, many more of them are active, practicing Christians and part of the team. So they're a complete gift. They read in their Bibles, they're praying, they're regularly at church, they're giving their all for it. And that has been a real gift to the UK church, is that we have got people from non-white ethnic background who are on fire for Jesus, and particularly when you go into the younger generations. So that's something that we're seeing where we are as well in London, as they are a real gift to the church. So that is some of the patterns that you can work out as well. Great. Now we're going to zoom out and look at the whole UK population. So we're going to look at slide 10, how people describe Jesus. So this is a bit more of a big zoom out. 20% of the population think that Jesus was actually God in human form. So it's pretty big. Now remember, they're not all, so we know that only 6% are really, really active, but that tells you, this gives you a bit more, that gradient in the non-practicing Christian So 20% of the UK would say that Jesus was God in human form who lived among people in the first century. That's big. So that's quite a big stat. So again, when we're having a cup of tea with somebody outside, we might want to ask them what they think about Jesus. So this is what this helps me to do. Not to assume that because they're not part of what we're doing, that they've got no understanding. Sometimes I think we always imagine we're going to reach the atheist. If they're not in with us, they're right over there. But what this research shows is how much nearer people are to us than we've necessarily imagined. Then 25% think he's a normal human being. And I like this, 33% a prophet or spiritual leader, not God. Much bigger than the Muslim population. So this is a general held belief in the UK at the moment, with many people thinking that Jesus is a spiritual leader. Well, that again is quite interesting. I can have a much more interesting drink in the pub or a cup of tea with somebody who thinks that Jesus is a spiritual leader or prophet. Have you ever read any words of this prophet? Would you be interested to read the words of this prophet? You know, do prophets and spiritual leaders, are they interesting to you? And if they are, these are some of the words that this prophet said. Would you like to read the life of this prophet? Do you see? So again, not as far away. They're not saying I'm an atheist. I'm not interested. They're saying, yeah, sort of spiritual leader, could have something useful. I can have a much greater dialogue with them. So again, what it's doing is it's helping us to understand, if you like, the gradient of belief that helps us understand our mission. Great. The next slide is really simple. Is Jesus a historical character? And this one, did he actually live? Did he actually live? But an atheist can believe that he actually lived. But it's fascinating because this goes down the younger you go. So a lot more of the younger generation haven't worked out that Jesus was an actual person. They think he's like Gandalf. He's a mythical or fictional character. So that is just something when we're doing schools work, which I'm sure you do, maybe not just calling it a story, because a story could be fictional. I'm going to tell you the stories of Jesus today. How is a child supposed to know that the word story, when we're using it about Jesus, is history? These are the historical life events of a person called Jesus Christ who lived and walked on earth. It's a very different introduction to the stories of Jesus, because a story could be fictional. So just us changing our language, we could change this one slowly in all the different places where we're working. And so even with small children, when we're working with them, just saying this is history, this really happened, this is an event that actually happened, can be really helpful. Great. Then we asked people what they thought about Jesus. You know that question about what do people think about boots? What do they think about Jesus? I want people to meet Jesus. That's my main aim. How do people respond when I say Jesus? So I know that some of them think he's God. I know that some of them think that he's a prophet. But is he positive? And he comes out as a spiritual, peaceful, wise leader. Oh, do you need any of those at the moment? Is there a shortage on spiritual wise, leaders? So that's attractive. That's what I'm trying to say. Jesus is attractive. So actually helping people understand that the spiritual wise leader could actually help them and would be a really great voice in both their life and in life nationally, because he is exactly the type of leader that we want. He's a spiritual wise, leader. Oh, yeah, actually, we could do with a bit of that. It's really interesting. So that's attractive. That's a really attractive. Now, for the next slide, don't click it up yet, Emily, but some of you will know it. We had Easter. How did Easter go where you went? It's always exciting having Easter. We're all exhausted from Easter still, probably, actually, even though it was quite some time ago. But Easter's always that big moment, isn't it? But what do people think about Easter and the resurrection of Jesus? How many people in the population believe that Jesus rose from the dead? Just have a little think.
I think Christmas is bigger than Easter.
Yes.
In so many ways, the way the population
Yeah.
to our services and stuff like that. So you only excluded last Christmas.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're gonna look at that as we look at this stat. We're going to look at what can we do about growing Easter. Great. Great. More people came this Easter. Other areas. Yeah, a growth around Easter. You thought there were less? Okay. So we're going to have a look at the next slide. This was the big jaw dropper that nobody believed. So next slide, Emily. This is a big jaw dropper that nobody believed when we first did the research, and we had to go and redo the research because at that point it was Archbishop Centimary just said, I can't, Rachel, I cannot possibly go on Radio 4 with this. You'll have to go do it again. And it is because 16% of the population say they believe word for word, that Jesus rose from the dead. And then look at that 29%. That's crazy. Off the scale madness, isn't it? In a scientific, convinced world. 29% are saying, so they're in that, that gradient of belief. Well, I do believe in the resurrection of Jesus from the dead, but not that all the story contains that. They're basically saying, I kind of believe. I somewhat believe. I believe to some extent. And only 41% of the UK population said they did not believe in the resurrection of Jesus. Now, would you not think that's a headline? That is a headline. That is enormous. And one of the church leaders I was with last week in Wales, he said, we went on to discuss Easter, and he said, we need to make Easter the FA Cup final for the church. We absolutely, Christmas is actually quite contested. There's Father Christmas, there's shopping, there's parties, there's a lot of noise. So if we could, yeah, there is the Easter Bunny, take that out and deal with the Easter Bunny. No, it can be quite useful. And I do like chocolate. So how could we, as a church, all together, and I mean all together, could we raise the bar? Because there's not so much of a fight, there's not so many other things to compete with. How can we make Easter go large? Go really large, go really big. So that's what we've been working on. Because that 29% is our target audience. Don't worry about the 41%. But actually, that's who we think. So when people come at Easter, we think that they've come and we're trying to convince them Jesus rose from the dead. They're probably coming because they're in the 29%. They've already got that far. They hear the same thing. They were convinced of it last year. They go home and eat their Sunday lunch or whatever they're doing. So we need, instead, there's a different conversation with the 29%, isn't there? Do you see? What that is, this could change you. This is not like just about, this could change your life. Do you want to meet the resurrected Jesus? That's the invitation this Easter. You could meet him just as his first followers met him. You could have a living encounter with him. He could transform you in the same way as he transformed them. And that 29% breaks again across the generations. It's not just so often people think, oh, it's just the elder. It is not. It's right across the generations. So we have a target audience at Easter across all the generations of people who somewhat believe in the resurrection of Jesus but haven't quite worked it out. So they're not far from us. Do you see? They're not miles off down the road atheists. They are so much nearer to us. So they are going to be way more open to an invite. They're going to be way more interested in what we're doing around Easter. They're kind of like, I'm a bit of this. Maybe I should go along to FA Cup final. I don't watch any of the other football matches, but I will watch that one. So we know they do it, but can we escalate it for Easter, but then really make a hook around Easter and make more noise around Easter? And what would that look like? And how could we reach that 29%? So I'm going to tell you a bit more about that in a minute, but I want to explain to you what happened in 2017. I know we're winding back the time. So those two stats together, the 16 and the 29%, mean that it's 45% of the UK population would say they believe in the resurrection of Jesus. I call that a headline. In 2017, the BBC went to the same polling company, because the company we work for works with everybody, the government, NHS, you name it. So that BBC came along and said, we want a headline for Easter Sunday. This is what they thought they were going to find. More people believe in reincarnation than resurrection. So they went to the polling, have you got any questions that can help us? And they would literally pull this one, we helped word this, but they pulled this from their bank and said, we'll rerun with this one. They said yes, and then they had other questions. They got this same crazy statistic. Now, you'd have thought they might have decided to put, for their headline, 2017, Easter Sunday. Wouldn't that have been nice? It would 44% of the UK population believe in the resurrection of Jesus. Is there some kind of revival happening in the UK? That would have been a great headline. But if you read your newspapers or your BBC commentary on your phone, what they printed was they worked out that they looked at the 41% who didn't believe. They gave him up with reincarnation because hardly anyone believes in that. So they looked instead at the 41% of people who said they didn't believe, and they worked out how many of them ticked that they were Christian. Do you remember? In that Christian percentage. And about 13% of Christians tick, I do not believe in the resurrection of Jesus. That was the headline. 13% of Christians in the UK do not believe in the resurrection. Has the church failed at its number one major doctrine? That is not the headline. How can you do that to us? And then we all read it and we just go, oh, a bit more with her. So every time you're, oh, you know, the census, oh, Easter. So I was like, this is crazy. So I went on the BBC local radio stations, and in those days, you sat in a little box and they moved you around the country. So you went, hello, we're local radio in Leicester, Exeter, you know, all round. And they go, hello, Rachel, what do you think about this really bad statistic? The church has obviously really failed in its task. I said, I'm not sure we have failed, actually, because 44% of the UK population do believe that Jesus rose from the dead. Then they would laugh. And so where on earth did you get that statistic from? And I'd say, your research. And they would say, that cannot possibly be true. Well, either all your research is wrong, or it's true. And then we would have this like little jaw-dropping moments going round. And people say, hello, Rachel, has the church failed? Well, I don't think so. Because 44% of the UK. And my friend, and then to go, well, my friends don't believe. And therein is your problem. You are in a bubble. As we all know now, we live in bubbles, don't we? Google refeeds to us what we already believe. We never come out of the bubble. Have our thought leaders ever got anything wrong on the British population before? Have they ever been so out of touch that they didn't know what the normal person down the street here actually thought or believed? And then have they acted out on that? So every time they said to me, my friends don't believe, I said, and that is your problem. I know your postcode, almost. I can predict where you live. And I can predict the people in the pub that you talk to. And of course, none of them believe. But you have not spoken to Fred and Frida, who live down this street, who do believe somewhat in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And then what happens is you feed back to all of us what you think is the truth. We're back to the paperback world, but you're wrong. We're now in Kindle world. You're wrong. You are out of touch. And it was a very interesting time on the radio. I wasn't quite that. But what it did is it served two things. It made me understand what was happening to us as church leaders. We're more wired in to what the big thought leaders are saying than we are to the people in our streets and communities. Because we don't hear from them. We don't have a mechanism to find out what they actually think. So we're believing. They just totally twisted this for their own purposes and chucked another bucket of water on the church. And that's why I spend a lot of my time going around trying to tell people the truth is different. And you know what the truth does? Sets us free. So we need to set free the church. You need to make sure, even if you just choose 3 stats for your church, this is one of the stats you need to choose for them. Because they need to recognize that there are many, many people who believe in the resurrection of Jesus. And they are their next door neighbours, or they're the school mum that they meet at the gate, or they're in their gym class, or they are down the pub. It's just that we never asked them. So we assumed they had no belief. Well, that makes Easter exciting, doesn't it? So they've not come to the clubhouse, but they have some element of belief and membership. Do you see? So what we've done is, the next slide, we're going big for Easter. You can use it with or without. You can use all this stuff with or without the people, because it depends on your context. So this year was, we got some way there because we only managed to finish all the films like a few weeks before. So we had quite a few churches who trialled this, I trialled it in my life group and I've had an amazing time. And it's called Alive. But the biggest thing to do would be to do it across an area so that we can make Easter the FA Cup final. Does that make sense? So you grab the branding, you can take the person off or put the person on or have a different person depending on your context. And we did this with Bible Society in Kingsgate Church and Hope. This is our live newspaper. This has got testimonies of people who've met the risen Jesus, i.e. they've come to faith. And it's got also some of the encounters from the Bible. You'll see why that's important as we go through, because people are really interested in the Bible. So testimonies, Bible. This is cheaper than a cream egg. So really easy to give away. I gave 400 of these out in a day. It was Brick Lane. I gave out 400 of these newspapers on Brick Lane. I also sprayed the streets. That was quite fun with chalk. If you've got an urban area, you can get permission from your council to spray the streets. Do get permission first. But you can spray your streets. So I sprayed Am I Alive all down the streets of Brick Lane with chalk, and then we gave out 400 of these, and just trying to make Easter. If we were all doing that, we'd get a sense of movement. And then we did a film series, which is the five encounters with the resurrected Jesus. So it looks at Mary, Cleopas and probably his wife, Thomas, Peter, and then we do Paul, just to take it out of that into like the Apostle Paul, which leads through to testimonies. Each session has testimonies of living people today who've met the resurrected Jesus, and it goes through felt need. So it starts with love, and then it looks at hope, and it looks at love, hope, is it peace, faith, and purpose. So we've really enjoyed them because we've had really big. I've had much deeper conversations, even with my life group. Some of them have come to faith. One of my long-term friends, it's really, really moving to me, has come and done this series with us, who's not a Christian, and it's been amazing because she so enjoyed it. She did one night of Alpha, and that didn't work for her, but she's loved Alive because it starts with a felt need, and then we have a big, wide conversation. And I've had conversations about life and death, what happens when you die, that I've not had with people, because this is something we need to talk about. The church really needs to talk about eternity. People out there we'll come to that, have got questions about what happens when you die, and we need to bring that back onto the table because we've got an answer, and it's not a vague. I feel that 29%, a lot of them, this is a vague hope that if there's something of an afterlife, I'd like to be in, but I don't know what it is. You know, all the cards you can buy about sitting on a cloud, or that person's kind of still with you. If you go into a shop, you'll find them, like in the card factory. You'll find popular spiritual belief about resurrection and eternity. It's a bit floaty and fluffy, but there's a concept of something. These people really want to hear. And we have got the most extraordinary good news. So how can we make Easter as absolutely big as possible? The other thing, so we did it, Kingsgate Church is a you can just shove around the newspaper. Kingsgate Church is in Peterborough, and they did, so basically we showed this stat, the resurrection stat to Dave, and he went, oh, that's really interesting. That really resonates with something that I did at church. I got everyone to stay for Easter Sunday. I pleaded with them not to go on holiday till afterwards. And then I said, bring all your friends. So make it as invitational as Christmas. Does that make sense? We're doing this really big thing. We're so excited about Easter. It's our big party. Will you come along? You know, so he got his church to be really invitational. They invited everybody. And then he said, when they got there, he said, it's amazing you're here. Da-da-da. We're going to do the first encounter that Jesus had when he came back from the dead. And then he said, and at the end he said, and next week we're doing the next one. So it's still a guest Sunday. So please come back. Because we'd love you to come back because we're doing the next encounter. And then he said, oh, it's wonderful that you've come that Sunday because actually next Sunday, it's still Easter and we're doing the next resurrection encounter. And then he said on that one, it's wonderful that you're here again, but we are doing the next resurrection encounter next. So it's still Easter. We'd love you to come back. Anyway, he did that for 5 weeks. On the sixth week, he had the most people ever who made a commitment to Jesus and joined their church. And I was like, oh, we need to put that with this stat. And then we need to help to get that story out there that we could go big on Easter together. So let's make Easter the FA Cup final that we invite everybody to, and let's keep inviting them back. And so you can do the film series, you can do it in groups, you can do it you can do it any way you like, really. It's all just there to be used for next year. But also, could you do regionally? What could you do to get Alive onto the streets regionally? What could you do so that every house in your area is invited to Alive and to Easter? So at Christmas, we often do drop a thing, don't we? We try to get every home invited to Christmas. Can we up our ante? Can we give a newspaper as well as an invite? Can we explain what this is? Could we do old-fashioned things like door-to-door are working again. I don't know if any of you are doing door-to-door. But because there's a change we're going to see as we go through, there's a change in the tide, things that we stopped doing are now reworking. So every house could have no one's going to be offended if you invite them to the biggest thing, your biggest festival. They're not going to be offended if you go to the door and say, we've got Easter coming, we would love to see you. It's our biggest moment of the year. It's all about celebrating the resurrection, which many of them actually do have some belief in. We'd love to see you there. Many more are interested and want to come. So we want to make Easter big.
Are you going to come back to Alive at all later, Rachel?
Maybe, who knows? Yeah. Anything else, Nigel? Throw it in.
I'll just say that the focus, we really wanted Alive to get going this year, but kind of missed the boat.
It was a bit late.
Or Eric will miss the boat one way or another. But we're doing it with our small group at the village church this year because we want the people who are going through it to either invite us next year.
Yeah.
And I would just drop that in.
Yeah.
And people are very animated. I mean, Rachel was there. I think Maggie, my wife's typical of most of the people in our churches in the sense that when I explained to Rachel what we were doing, Maggie's response is, oh yeah, we do expect people to come Christians. Well, that's what she thinks of here, but the evidence of the church is they don't, because they don't talk to people, because they have not got confidence. But Alive, the series, is really good at reminding people that people are going to faith and it does transform their lives.
Yeah.
And we need that inside our people. So I just thought that.
Yeah, and you could just run it in your church. You could run it through in your church and then say we're going to run it for Easter. People have a lot more confidence to bring somebody to something that they themselves have seen. That's what that often happens, doesn't it? If I'd known it was this good, I would have invited someone, but I didn't know, so I didn't because it's a bit nerve-wracking. So actually, just running it through as a church, which you could do it doesn't have to be Easter, does it? You could run it at any point of the year. You could say, look, we're going to run this through because then we're going to run it, inviting our whole neighbourhood. We're going to invite everybody we know to Easter.
So would you say that this is like a pre-alpha?
Yes. Yeah. I would say it's further back into because it comes through a felt need, but it's really deep on things like faith, afterlife, eternity, which we found, like even my friend, she's actually found that really great. She's really responded well to having a great, like a proper meaningful conversation about what happens when you die. So it's kind of got that combination, but it doesn't do about the Bible or any of the stuff that Alpha does. It doesn't do that kind of methodical approach through. Yeah. Yeah, it would work really well to then run Alpha, to do this, because it's not trying to do what it doesn't do. Alpha is almost like a bit of mini discipleship. It's not doing that at all. It's just doing, these people met the resurrected Jesus. This is the difference it made in their lives. And here are some testimonies of people who've recently met the resurrected Jesus. This is what happened in their lives. Let's have a conversation about this. So it's just more gentle. And you do that for 5 weeks and people they're loving that kind of conversation.
Well, what it's also doing, I don't think this was part of the plan, was it, in terms of purpose behind the series, is because it's starting with people's felt needs. You've got all those people who are committed Christians, yeah, I believe, but because it's hitting love, faith,
Purpose,
they're actually thinking, oh, okay, yeah, I do believe that up here, but no, it hasn't really impacted my life. In that kind of way. So set a sense of security, their conviction that their identity in Jesus, those kind of things, it's really challenging them. That's what in my little look at it this year.
We're getting some really good feedback from it, from around. Quite a few Salvation Army Corps have run it, really interestingly. They've picked up on it, and they're giving us really good feedback. So people have really enjoyed it. Both Christians and non-Christians have both enjoyed it. So the Christian isn't bored. You know, this is not like stuff I'm bored to talk about. They're actually, so I've just done it. I just did it in my life group to trial it. And I brought my friend, and someone else brought a friend, and so we're just doing it like that. But actually, all the girls are really enjoying it. Many of them are new Christians anyway, so it's cracking material for them too. But yeah, all different spectrum of the journey. So we just want to make Easter big. So anything you can think of, how can you gang up together with the churches in your area and make Easter big? I know we often do the walk of witness, but it can be quite quiet, understandably so. But, you know, would it be good to take praise and celebration out there? So you do your Easter Sunday service and then you go out and make a lot of noise in the afternoon, because that actually is very attractive to people. Our worship is really attractive to people, with an invitation to encounter. So how can we do that? Right, okay. What we might do is buzz around our tables for a little bit. Just trying to think, sort of 10 minutes till coffee. So we could do a couple of things. Let me just see what we're doing next on here. We'll do 2 more slides and then we will stop for coffee. So, yeah, a bit more. Have you ever played hide and seek with a 3-year-old? Some of the things you have to do is like, you know, if you were hiding here, you'd do this, wouldn't you? You'd sort of like be half out. And then they always come back to the same place, don't they, to look for you. They think if you hid there last time, you had it. But sometimes I think we hide Jesus too much from non-Christians. He's really hard to find, but we need to sort of make Jesus more obvious, maybe come out from behind the sofa. And one of the key things to do would be to ask people where they might look for him. So, you know, a child, you think, oh, they'll probably, if we're playing like, they'll probably look behind the sofa and behind the curtain. So maybe that's where I'll go. Not that we're trying to hide Jesus, we're trying to actually make Jesus really evident and clear. But we sometimes forget to ask the really obvious, which is where would somebody go to find Jesus? Now, you know the answer when you think about it logically. You absolutely know the answer. Where would you go to find out about the weather? Where would you go to find out about where to eat? Where would you go to find out about where to go on holiday, what shoes you're going to buy? Where would you go? So where would a non-Christian go to find out about the Christian faith? Yeah, really obvious. So, where do we need to put Jesus? Great. Where do you need to put your church? So, it's really obvious, isn't it? But we just, you know, I know it sounds like absolutely daft. So, the next slide. Next slide, and then the next slide. Overwhelmingly, 26% of non-Christians, and this is the non-Christians now, we're dealing with that slightly further away group. So we had the non-practicing Christians are over here. We'll look at them, but we're dealing with the non-Christians said the number one place they would look to find out about the Christian faith is the Google. It's so obvious. All the 18 to 24-year-olds are in the YouTube. They won't be using Google. They'll be on YouTube. So we need to make sure that if we want to be found, we need to be where they're looking. It's really obvious, isn't it?
It's all right, you've got young people in the church that can use the tech.
Exactly. So that's just a question, isn't it? What is our reach and our connection? I know in Christian leadership, it gets harder and harder to know people who don't know Jesus. Because the list of people who want to see you a Christian, the needs are always in front of you. You have to be ridiculously intentional to get out of that bubble. I mean, ridiculously intentional to get out of that bubble. But then we need to model it if we are wanting other people to be out of the bubble. So it's intentional. If we're not intentional, it will never happen. So how do people know us? They know us really well. So next slide, the people that they know who are a practicing Christian are in that friend and family category. So this is not distant. Neighbours gone up. We've doubled the size of neighbours that we know because the pandemic was really good at neighbourhood WhatsApp chats. Do you remember? All of a sudden, everybody knew everybody in the street. We may have lost some of that as we've gone away from the pandemic, as we've gone back into knowing other people. But neighbour leapt. But it is mostly our family and friends. So the non-Christian mostly is thinking about a family member or a friend when it comes to the Christian that they know. And the other interesting thing is when you look statistically deeper into the stats, they're mostly peer-to-peer relationships. We checked that because someone said, oh yeah, well every 18 to 24-year-old has a grandma who's a Christian. But that wasn't the person they were thinking of. The 18 to 24-year-old was thinking of an 18 to 24-year-old. That's who they were thinking of. And so really interestingly, again, I think it's societal. Most of these relationships are in their generations. So most people, that if you ask a 55-year-old, do they know a non-Christian 55-year-old, if they know a practicing Christian, it's going to be someone who's in their same age bracket that they first think of. And if you ask an 18 to 24, it's someone in their own age bracket that they first think of. So most of these people are that, you know, and that's partly because we are actually, when you think about how we do school, all the things that we do that actually split us up into generational cohorts, that's often where people socialise a lot. Apart from the church is one of those amazing community mixes of generations. We're really unusual. Again, we're countercultural. There's a lot of amazing things about the church that I just love, because we are countercultural in a world of isolation. We talk about family and community. In a world of age segregation, we talk about intergenerational. So anyway, that's what that stat is. So when you're looking at your church, most of their contacts will be in the generation in which they are in, unless we make intentional moves to come out of our comfort bubble. And then that's the other thing. So when you are a missionary, you make the move. So when we're being missional, we go into the culture, but we have to make the sacrifices to be missional. So that's what we have to help our church to do. Our churches, the Christians need to make the sacrifices to go and dwell in the other places. And then when we bring people out, when people come to faith, all of a sudden, that's when we've actually got the massive job of rediscipling them out of the culture in which they were inhabiting into a new culture, which is the culture of an apprentice of Jesus Christ. We're definitely seeing that. So, but it's like the Bibles, it really matters, the design really matters whilst you're trying to reach someone. Do you see? So you use the language in which you use the language of the person you're trying to reach. But as they come out, and as we then disciple them as Christians, things like reading a Bible regularly, fasting, praying, giving, all of those things are ridiculously countercultural for a secular individual who is completely shocked that anybody should have anything to say about their own finance. Because I am my own individual, and this is mine. What is this giving? Do you see? So, but as missionaries, we are the ones who go, and then there's this massive task that we have as we disciple people, because there is actually an extraordinary cultural clash at the moment that we are experiencing. So where did that come from, Rachel? Who knows? Anyway,
can I just ask
yes.
a question then? So if I in my early 60s have a missional heart to go out and reach, am I wasting my time by approaching 20-year-olds?
No, because they're the most open generation.
But is it better?
No, so you can do it, but you'll have to be intentional. But basically, so if you've got a church who's you'll be like, oh, if you simply said to your church, invite a friend to church, if everybody in your church was 60, the only person they're going to invite is a 60-year-old. So if you want to invite somebody who's younger, they're all going to have to go and take a new sport or hobby up, something they've never dreamt of, probably. I don't know, they'll have to go to a coding class. Do you see? But if they went to a coding class to learn how to do computer coding, I bet you they'd make friends of a different generation. But if they only stay doing bowls, they might not. So that's where the intention comes in. So, and interestingly enough, the younger generation, that generation, are very interested in an older generation. So we have got a unique opportunity. So that wasn't necessarily always the case, but the current Gen Z are really hungry for the wisdom of older generations. So in London, in our church, we just have an absolute dearth of older people, to our detriment, because we don't have enough mothers and fathers of faith to get alongside, mentor and disciple the people coming to faith who are young and desperately want to talk about how on earth they navigate their modern world. Then you go somewhere else in the country and they're like, we are overrun with marvellous spiritual mothers and fathers, but they haven't got anybody to disciple. I'm like, and that is, if you look back at the centre, it's because of the geography of where we move. So people move into London when they're young, then when they get married and have a child, they get to second child, they move out of London to nearby, and then they jump right out. And then when people retire, they go right off to wherever. Yeah. But then we're like, excuse me, could you? I know that East London has no sea to walk by, but we do have a sea of young lives who need you. So I wonder if any of the older generation could be really missional and actually leave their palatial house in it with the river view in wherever and move to a one-bedroom flat for the sake of the gospel. And I mean that genuinely, for the sake of the gospel, because no one will. Because everybody wants to live with a river view, and it's beautiful, but we are overwhelmed. We're like, so we can't pull in the hall, and we're overwhelmed. Oh, we'd love that to happen in our church, but they're not there. So missionally, the missional call is the other way. If that's where they are, and they're hungry and they want to know Jesus, we as missionaries need to go and inhabit their world. But we want them there. So we've got this problem. We genuinely in our church do not have enough spiritual mothers and fathers. I just cannot possibly mentor or help all the people who want me to spend time with them. It's not a humanly possible task. And we have so few of people who've actually walked the walk, lived the talk, done 50. Nobody had done 50. When this missionary couple came back from France, I was ecstatic. And I ran down the church to greet them. She said it was a bit overwhelming. Because I was thrilled that somebody who was like 70 had rocked up to church. So I grabbed hold and I was like, I am so thrilled you're here. We really need you. They were a bit exhausted from missions work. So anyway, we've got through that. But she said, when you first turned up, I was just like, oh my word. But I was like, you are just a breath of fresh air. It's kind of the other way in other churches, isn't it? But and they're staying. And I'm like, thank you. They're staying. Hallelujah, they're staying. Hallelujah, they're willing to make a difference. Hallelujah, they're willing to actually stick there and belong. So I say that, yeah, I love it. Anyway, sorry. That's a bit of a soapbox of mine, as you just saw. Pardon?
In the absence of all of that.
Yes.
Because we're not that superficial.
Yeah.
Can online stuff help?
Yes, to a certain degree. To a certain degree, it can help. So we could do I have thought about doing a massive mentoring pairing system. Yeah. So everywhere I went, I could sign up 5 people who'd be willing to mentor online somebody in our church, and then we could multiply that out across the churches so that you could Zoom call. And then people would actually want to meet up for coffee before long, wouldn't they? So yeah, there is a question of whether we can do it whether we could do that, because that is right across London. We're not the only ones. Or the London, this is our massive problem. And actually, when they leave, oh man, and there's nobody holding their hand, and there's disconnect. So we could look at it.
That would get it started.
It would, wouldn't it?
I for one wouldn't mind travelling into London every 6 months or something.
Great.
But it's like weekly or fortnightly or whatever.
Okay, we've got to give it a go, haven't we? Okay, we're going to give it a go. Don't know how we're going to do it, but we're going to give it a go, people, because it could easily work, and we could multiply it across, and then we would create the mothers and fathers of faith who've walked for years would be able to help people. They've never done anything, so it's just like, yeah, I like it. Okay, it's the second place where that's come up, so maybe we just have to go with the Lord and go with that. I know, and you don't all have to give up your houses. I'm sorry, I sound really like it's hilarious, but it is interesting. And you will be able to reach people in your neighbourhood who are of a younger age bracket. And in a Bristol, so if you as a team, if you could go into the inner city Bristol and you would pick that age bracket up who are hungry for that. So yeah, it's really interesting. So they know us really well. What do they think of us? Think of the average sitcom, people. When did you last watch something, a sitcom? Number one, when was there last a Christian portrayed in the programme that you watched? Yeah. Any others? The Archers. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, they're normally the murderer.
Yeah. Yeah.
fairly recently about abuse in churches.
Yeah, perfect. How helpful is that? Yeah, I think you're right, yeah. So, number one, when we do turn up occasionally, but think about our percentages. And if you looked at one of the big producers of a lot of the media that we consume, it would be America. If you looked at their stats, I wonder how many people in any one of those sitcoms should be a Christian. Like percentage-wise, probably half, let alone one that doesn't even turn up. So that's number one. My number one complaint is we're a bit whitewashed. Then when we are there, what do we look like? Yeah. So it's not helpful, is it? It's again another one of those things that just drains the confidence and life out of us. All I'd like to say, I did watch with my niece on a really good Christian musical for teenagers on Netflix, and it was excellent. And we sang along, and it was amazing. And I was like, oh. And so this is again, I did wonder about just the beginning to go the change. It was on Netflix. It was a musical aimed at teenagers, and it did a really positive job of representing the church. It was staggeringly good. So what was it called? A Week Away. I was like, oh, this is really, and it was on Netflix, sort of mainstream. So, hurrah. But under normal circumstances, prior to that, what would have been the traits that we would have assumed that a Christian might be thought of having? So we thought we'd ask the population, what did they think about the Christian that they knew? And this is this, look. Aren't we lovely? Aren't we lovely? We are lovely. And you know what? This is so powerful. It's so powerful, isn't it? It's such a powerful stat. So I've seen this one. So if I was picking out for a church context, resurrection and this stat will boost the confidence of your church. Because they just go, oh, I'm liked. They know I'm a Christian and they like me. Oh, that's a lot easier. So when I ask them about something, they don't think I'm weird. They don't think I'm like Dot Cotton. They like me. They think I'm friendly, caring, generous, and good-humoured. Yay! Isn't that exciting? That stat on its own, if you had to pick one, because what's happened is we've just all withered a bit. Every time we get portrayed badly, we're just like, oh, can't possibly mention I'm a Christian. Because people will think I'm weird. Well, they don't. They really like you. The church, on the other hand, next slide, not so good. The church as a whole doesn't get such a good press. This is where we get a little bit of negative. We're kind of good and bad, really. And that's, again, if you ask someone about their local politician, amazing. You ask someone about politicians in general, disastrous. So it's to do with the institution, the people that I don't know. So the church as a whole, this big institutional thing, is not so liked, which shows us that the mission field is very relational.
That's true throughout our society.
Yes.
Well, isn't it?
Yeah.
The finance department at work are terrible.
Yes.
But Alison can finance.
Yes. Yeah.
It's the same thing.
It's the very same thing, which shows us that then the best place for mission is in that relational positive, rather than coming along as the finance department. So that's like when we actually put a person and face to church. People are going much more, actually Bob from church turned up on the doorstep and said hello. That's much better than just a generic church thing. Does that make sense? So we've got to humanise. Oh, I wonder who did that. It might be named Jesus. We've got to make the gospel incarnational. Very simple, really. That's what Jesus did. So, we've got to make it neighbourhood. We've got to make it incarnational, because that is where it will be received positively. It's unlikely that the big media stream is really going to ever help us. Okay, then we asked whether, so somebody knows us, they like us, have they ever had a conversation with us about Jesus? What do we think? So, next slide. About 55% of the non-Christians had a conversation with that practicing Christian about Jesus. Really interested, is that higher or lower than you would have thought? Or you hadn't had time to think about it? Higher? Yeah, so generally amongst leaders, you would normally get people think it's higher. I haven't really thought about it, don't know. So most people think, oh yeah, no, that. So 44% of the non-Christians have not had that conversation, but 55% have had a conversation about Jesus. And not about just fluffy, but about Jesus. That's pretty good going, isn't it? I think this is like, as a church leader, we're just not there when it happens. So we had an equation that went, if people were talking about Jesus, there'd be more people in church. There's not more people coming to church, no one's talking about Jesus. But what happens if it's just an awful lot of talking about Jesus that we need to do before we can even invite somebody over the threshold? Do you see? Which actually we all know from our own lives, but somehow that bit of the equation was missing. So my mother, Stephen knows my mother, she's a great evangelist. Pre-pandemic, she went, she's a woman of routine as well. Every Monday is shopping day in Morrison's. So every Monday afternoon, she would be going to Morrison's supermarket, pre-pandemic. And then this is, again, how the world has shrunk because she now orders online because she's got older and can't get to the supermarket as easily. But she would go every day, at the same time, do the same shop probably, and then go through the same desk to talk to the same cashier because she's an intentional missionary. So she built a relationship with that woman because she saw her once a week. And they got to know each other. They'd chat. She'd ask her what was happening in her life. She got to know all about a young gang on holiday. They knew everything about each other. So when the cashier in Morrison's hit a life crisis, who did she turn to? My mother. Isn't it beautiful? And my mother, all she had was her Bible reading notes in her handbag, sort of her Every Day with Jesus. So she pulled out Every Day with Jesus and gave them to the cashier. She got back next week. The woman's like, I've read all of those. Could I have some more, please? She'd read 3 months' worth in a week. Isn't that exciting? But that woman never made it to church on Sunday. Oh, she doesn't count. Do you see? So we just don't, a lot of this, we're just as leaders, we're not seeing because we're not in Morrison's. And in life, if you ask, and we're asking what happened, has any of you had a conversation this week to get it into life group? I've forgotten to do it, I need to bring it back. I did it with the Talking Jesus. We do a Talking Jesus course that you can run in your life groups that brings all this alive to church groups and makes them discuss and talking about their faith, which we've seen have really great results just because it gets people talking about it. Well, one of the things is praying for 5 people who don't know Jesus. It's talking about where you've talked. And it's really interesting when one girl was like, yeah, I took my car in for an MOT and somehow got from that to Jesus. And then she had the whole garage, everybody in the garage mechanics, the other person who brought in their car, they were all having a conversation about Jesus. And I'd have never known it if I hadn't have asked, has anyone had a conversation this week? And she just took her car into the garage. But she just got from it. And there's some people who are real naturals. I have a friend who's an absolute natural. We were in the Marks and Spencer's queue. She's buying a reduced prawn mayonnaise sandwich. I like to give people a challenge. And she's like, she got from the reduced prawn mayonnaise sandwich to Jesus with another girl in the queue. And I'm like, whoa, you've taken this to a whole nother level. But it was a really interesting conversation because that girl had been invited to a Muslim. She will have come from our back. She'd been invited to a Muslim thing by a Muslim friend that she was going to that evening. So we had a really interesting conversation all over, and it all started because of the prawn mayonnaise sandwiches. But again, I was like, whoa, because someone else is inviting you. If I'm not inviting you, someone else is inviting you in that vacuum. Really fascinating. That's a prawn mayonnaise sandwich story. Great. What am I talking about? Probably not that. Anyway, what I'm saying is a lot more of these conversations are happening than we as leaders think they are because that is the non-Christian memory of it. Not even the non-practicing Christian. Remember, warmer, fuzzier, gradient. These are the I am not a Christian group. And all those conversations are happening. So then we asked the practicing Christian oversample. So remember, they are part of worshiping community. They're praying and they're reading their Bibles. How they feel about conversations. 75% felt it was their responsibility to talk. Remember, this is team. 77 felt comfortable, but 57% felt they could answer difficult questions. 40% felt they couldn't. The group that said that they couldn't was particularly younger. So more of our young adults were saying, the questions are really difficult. We all know the questions are really difficult. They're difficult in the church. They're difficult outside of the church. And so it's particularly around those areas. The EA have done a really cracking job on something called Being Human, which helps people to do a better job of the difficult conversations because you have to go back further to understand where the culture clash is. So basically, being a Christian is a direct cultural clash with a lot of people's preconceived, a lot of where they've been discipled. The world is discipling one way, we're discipling another way. There's a huge clash. Some of those things are falling out around some of the really difficult questions, and we have to skill up. We have to skill up young adults to come back, peel back. You have to come right out of the conversation, and even us ourselves come back right out of the conversation to see where the assumptions have been made that have led people through to the conclusions that they've come to. Did that make sense? Yeah. Okay. And that piece of work, so you can't just have a pat answer to a question when we're dealing with some of the really tricky things that we're dealing with as a society. The straight answer won't work. So actually the job is you almost have to zoom out, get a big wide visual lens. Basically what we're needing to work out is, how do we work out what is right or wrong? That's actually the big question in today's world. And do we do it by an inner compass, or is there any exterior force or any exterior opinion that we might be listening to? And that's what we have to start with, because actually that's where it then all unflows and unpacks. I don't know if man, that's a difficult. Anyway, so basically that's the skill set that young adults need to be able to have a decent apologetic conversation. It's not about creationism. It's going to be about 67 different genders that you can choose from in Germany. You know, that's the conversation they're going to get completely into a muddle about. That's going to be really tough for them, and unless we skill them up, they're just going to go, ah! So that's the work that needs to be done, and it's a different type of apologetics, and it's to do with how we decide what we decide in the end is there right and wrong? That's actually the question that we've actually have to dial all the way back to. Where do we get that from? Because one of the best, I've got it on a final slide. This even comes down to the gospel. And so we might have that conversation after lunch on what is the gospel and how do we talk about the gospel, because all of that is also where there is a cultural clash. It's a similar cultural clash. Is there a God? Isn't a question they're asking, but what is reality is a question that what is reality and who decides? Because if I define my own reality and my reality is inside of myself and nobody else can question my reality or say that my reality is wrong, then I can be a cat. And then I can say that you must all then respond to me. God doesn't think that person's a cat. But that's because God is outside of that internal reality world. So the same clashes that we're having around some of these difficult and complex issues is also the same complexity that you have when you are talking about the good news of Jesus Christ, because he is external to them. And it's to do with the worldview and the reality and the way we actually interpret being human. So some of that work, if you look at the EA's work on being human, you will find some very helpful tool sets to help explain to a 23-year-old why they've got why they're struggling here. And that's why we're not going to do that work, because they've done that work. So instead I just bring it up at this point and say, have a look at that. Great. And then I'm going to have a look at something we did at the HTB Leaders Conference with a man called Johannes, he's German, Johannes, Hartl, and I've got a link for you, I haven't actually got it, but his talk at the HEB Leadership Conference that was on reality, old reality, new reality, so a bit like paperback versus Kindle, and he explains this, and it really helped, and I was like, oh yeah, this helps with explaining the gospel, because we need to understand where the clash is, and why the discipleship task is also so enormous. But I will show you that link. It's only because when I saw it, I thought this is so helpful. I just need to tell other people to watch this, because it will help you when you're in dialogue. Great. Oh goodness, how did we get to that? We're doing some really interesting things around all this. So anyway, 42%, look at this one. 54% felt they knew someone, 42% didn't. So remember that really active team. The problem with the really active team is they get hoovered. into church. They're on the worship team. They're on the prayer team. They're running the food bank. They're always at church. And they're so hoovered into church they don't actually know anybody who doesn't know Jesus. So when we say, could you please invite somebody to Easter? They're like, don't know anyone. Do you see? Because we've hoovered them up. Or that they know a non-Christian. This is another issue. Some of the non-Christians I know, they don't live anywhere near my church. I couldn't possibly invite them. They live in Edinburgh. How can I help my friend in Edinburgh who doesn't know Jesus come to faith? Because I live in London. So I can't invite her. Do you see? That's a whole different thing of. So if we actually ask our team where the issue is, we will find out a lot of interesting things. Well, yes, I do know non-Christians. I'm praying for them regularly, but it's my brother-in-law. It's not my brother-in-law, by the way. Just checking the lesson. Dear me, that was nearly a disaster, wasn't it? Nearly a disaster. Yeah. Yeah. So it's like, can you see you can see the stretch and the issues, can't you? So I can't invite that person to Easter Sunday at my church. Well, I wonder if I need to go, what do I need to do to get that person to something? I don't know. You can see the problem. So some of the problems of evangelism, we need to talk to the team to understand who they're praying for. How could I support you to reach that person who doesn't live anywhere near this church? But we could support you to a bit like, how can we solve the problem of mentoring without everyone hasn't got to come and live in a one-bedroom flat. We could use Zoom. Do you see? It could be similar. Well, you could run the Wellbeing series, or you could run the Alive series online, and then you could we could run it online, and we could invite disparate friends from around the country to come. Great, super, let's do that. And then we'll sort out what we do after that if they come to faith. But do you see? Thinking outside the box. Great, so that's a problem we need to work with, and we could all start a new club, go to the coding club or whatever it's called. When we have a conversation, this is really exciting. So when I, as a Christian, talk to, remember this is non-Christians, about Jesus, what happens? Are you ready? Next slide. So this is the non-Christian telling me that they've had a conversation with that practicing Christian about Jesus. 75% of them felt comfortable. Only 22% of them felt they were missing out on our faith. But 55% weren't open to an experience, but 36% were. It wasn't everybody, but I'll take 36%, wouldn't you? And these were open to an experience or an encounter with Jesus Christ. That's not like soft. Woo! Boom. Next slide. And a further 33% also wanted to know. So let me explain this to you. So some of those people are the same people, some of them aren't. So you've got about a 1 in 3 of these people either want to know about Jesus or experience or encounter him. Some of them are the same person. Some of them actually say, I want to know. They probably want to go away and read a Bible. Some of them want to experience. They want to feel and experience God first. And then they'll work out what they think. And so this is really interesting. Some people come to faith because they work out the knowledge. Some people come to faith because they experience and then work out the knowledge. Some have the knowledge and then have the experience. You'll know that, but we need to remember it when we're doing mission with people. We just need to remember, not everybody's going to go down a let you take me through this logical sequential argument. No use at all. If you were going to be someone who just needs to be prayed for, experience God, and then you'll ask what the question is. Do you see? So both are really important in the way that we do evangelism. But the really exciting thing is that 1 in 3 people, after we've had a conversation with a Christian, want to either know or experience Jesus. To me, that is just an amazing statistic. And these are the non-Christians. It gets higher if you look at the non-practicing Christians. The younger you go, it just goes up. So if what you said about going to the younger generations, the younger you go, you get like 46% of people. It's almost half and half of the younger generations who either want to know about Jesus or experience him for themselves. Yes.
I had to relearn how to connect with people because I think we've been so conditioned that we've got to get them across the line by saying a nice little prayer and stuff like that. and they get saved. But it's actually, I've learned that it can be through experience, or it can be a prayer, or but because we're open to different ways of how quickly and how slowly people come to faith. It's not a formula what we have to get them across the line to do. So
it's a scale. It's like a long scale, isn't it? And this is what one of the guys on because two guys on our board, it's Mark Greenwood has that book, doesn't he, on our board. He's got big yes, little yes, healthy maybe, as people's responses. That there's a whole gradient of response. Healthy maybe is lovely. These are people saying they're saying healthy maybe, but we could misinterpret it. So healthy maybe is a great place. And sometimes, like when we hear all these stories of people went down the streets and all these people prayed the prayer, but then nothing ever happened because we didn't connect with them. So instead, we need to travel with them, and it might have been that was probably a healthy maybe, but there wasn't anything to follow up. The 40% who said they'd like to read the Bible with someone is a healthy maybe, and then we need to say, I wonder how we could get you to do a little yes, and eventually at some point you'll suddenly know you're doing a big yes and probably get baptized. But there's the other interesting thing we did in the research in 2015, it was a question we took out to put others in, was we asked if people came to faith in one experience, several key experiences, or a journey over time. And do you know what? It was a third split. So a third of people are journey, and we were about to we could so easily have said, journey. But some people genuinely, boom, they walk in a room, they encounter God, and they're never the same again. Other people, I've come along to this, and I've come along to that, and I think maybe, and I'm moving, and you suddenly eventually realise they're just swimming in the sea and they're following Jesus. And another person can actually track, well, somebody invited me, I went to this, I did Alpha, I joined this group, I'm now a Christian. And the information on that is, they all work, let's let God be God, but we should not make an assumption. So we shouldn't say everything's got to be a journey now, because we've got there a journey. Some people, when you are genuinely, you could be on the streets. We had a lovely guy who joined our church, and he had got saved resoundingly by a street preacher in Manchester. Resoundingly. Probably doing things that I would think are just completely not appropriate. Do you see? But God is God. And he was searching. And so he listened to that street preacher, sat down with that street preacher and gave his life to Jesus. Hallelujah, that somebody was there. And he comes from a completely non-Christian background. And then when he moved to London, he came and found our church. So who am I to say what works? Because genuinely, it's God's on his own terms. So it's just basically, there's actually... This is a great healthy maybe. The one thing I can tell you, the one thing I can guarantee you statistically is that there are people right now who would currently call themselves a non-Christian, but who want to know about Jesus or encounter him. Did the task of evangelism just get a little bit easier? We just have to find them and not worry about the rest. Do you see? My job is not to reach the rest. My job is to find these people. And as long as I am obvious enough, and as long as they feel invited, and as long as there's a place where they can meet me, then there is this massive harvest field. I had this hilarious story of a lovely couple. They're amazing. And they often do a gazebo they've done a shop in Bedford High Street. They've done a gazebo. They are wonderful at just reaching people. But I hope they won't mind me saying, but over the road from them, their next door neighbour, the husband had died. And so they were doing that really, they were going on that gentle, please come over and have coffee. Then they ran a craft club. Then they did...
Where's your charger?
Oh, probably in the suitcase. Yeah, in the suitcase, which is somewhere. It's going well, isn't it? Oh, yeah, okay.
Don't panic, we have the tech.
It's all right, it's nearly lunchtime.
It's nearly lunchtime. We'll come into land on a story. Yeah, exactly. So the neighbour, she's like 80, 90. Husband's died. So they do tea. They have her over. They've done a craft club. They take her to they do this, they do that. And then one day she's sitting in her living room. She goes, would it be possible? I would love to come to your church. How do I get to do that? And you're like, oh yeah. Because they were doing the, must be really careful, softly, softly, softly. And she was just sitting there going, God, dear me. What sort of certificate do I need to actually get an invite to church? She was just waiting. And I just made them laugh because they go out, they've got their gazebo, they're on the high street, but we can be really funny with the people in our own lives. But actually she was sitting there desperate to get to church. Please let me get to this community. I want to meet the person I met at the craft event. How do I get there? Can you just take me to your church, please? Makes you laugh, doesn't it, really? Because we are so funny. We are just so funny. Because we just don't realise necessarily where other people are. And this is, or it isn't anyway. But 1 in 3 people in the population in the UK are sitting there waiting for their Christian friend to bring Jesus back up in conversation. 1 in 3 people in the UK, they've had a conversation with that Christian they know, and they are waiting to be told how they could possibly experience or encounter Jesus. And we're sitting there going, well, we don't want to be too pushy here, do we? We need to go slow. Don't want to be too like. So it's just, you can almost imagine it, can't you? It's like they're almost this hilarity of they're waiting and we're waiting and everybody's waiting, and instead that's where we need to show that and say, just get bolder. And it's not everybody, so it's a bit of like a, oh, no, oh, yes, great. Do you see? That doesn't matter. It's statistics. So it wouldn't make any difference if it's me or you or anybody else. Anyone, it's not to do with the person, it's just to do, there is openness. And I remember listening on a tube train to a sales team, and the guy, they had a little mantra. And what happens when someone says no? Oh, we go on to the next one. Why? Because we know. And they knew their stats of how, I can't remember what they were trying to sell. They knew roughly how many people were open to whatever it was they were going to sell. And so their job was not to spend a lot of time on the no's. Not to spend lots of time on the no's. That's fine, you're a no, next. That's not rudeness. We're just trying to find the people who are open. And yeah, and the Apostle Paul, he got on with it in an area, then he moved on. And he brought to faith the people who were ready, and then he left them to crack on with it. And he didn't get resounding yeses from everybody. Did he? Let's be honest. No. So that's the other thing. Expectation levels. We are not expecting an 100% yes. This is really good news, the Church of Jesus Christ. So we're just looking for the ones that are open. We have to not worry about the ones that aren't. And as we step up the game, if we look at the New Testament, we could get some serious opposition. Not to be surprised at. Let's just plough on. We're looking for the open. But this is a staggering statistic. And in 2015, people, do you know what it was? It was 1 in 5. And in 2022, it's 1 in 3. So basically, it's now. It's now. And there's a lot of, we'll look at the reasoning why after lunch, but it's now. So we have to go now. We can't wait till we've all recovered from the pandemic. We can't wait. The door will close, but there are things that have happened in our world, society and community that have all come together for this little moment that means the door is open now. And that's why we're seeing things that we thought would never work, like yellow tablecloths and Bibles, working. Do you see? It's to do with that. Poor laptop. Must be time for lunch. The laptop thinks it is. Yes?
Do we have to think about church? Because we normally know people by them coming on a Sunday. But like
Yes.
I have 30 people here who don't come on a Sunday. But they're open to be prayed with,
Yep.
to say grace, to talk about Jesus.
Yep.
But they're not considered Christians until they give their life and they come on a Sunday.
Yes, they're in that amazing scale, aren't they? But the other thing you could ask is, how do you disciple them? Because your next task is, I've got this incredible group. So it's always, what's next? What's my next step? And it might never be Sunday as we know it. It might be that you've got to, depending on if they're a group that could be identified. Pardon? Yeah, it probably is. It probably is. It's like, what do I do next? So one of the women who prays, she runs something in a garden centre, and she's got an amazing group of people, and they come every week to the garden centre and they do like a Christian thought and reading and prayer in the garden centre. Is that church? Is that not church? What's going on? Where are they on the scale? Have they prayed the prayer, signed up? Does Jesus mind? It's interesting. So yeah, it's like have you seen like the grayscale, which is open, closed, as well as concepts of belief? So sometimes we're just working on somebody from I absolutely know, like I'm completely close to all this, to open, but they actually might not have moved up any of this, almost the cognitive thought. Does that make sense? I should have a slide for that. But basically, you've probably seen the Engel scale, most of you, haven't you? Which takes people from atheist on a long scale all the way through to following Jesus and then discipleship up in the Christian journey. And it's all about your mental belief. It's all about I want to know. And then but now you chuck in another axis which goes across in this grayscale, which is closed to open. And sometimes people are just moving from closed to open, but they may not have actually moved anywhere up the knowledge scale. One amazing person got that scale and went around the whole of their messy church asking people where they were. And nobody minded at all. They found it a very interesting exercise. And they were like literally marking themselves on this chart. Well, I was closed and I was an atheist, but I remember one of the stories, but my wife sent me with the kids to messy church because she couldn't make it. And I found all this warm welcome and these wonderful people. And so that helped me move. So I've moved here, but I hadn't moved anywhere in concept of belief, but was now open. And this is how people come to faith. So you remember we had that really big sample of practicing Christians. We were like, wow, whilst we've got that sample, let's have a look at what we can find out about this group of people. So, because you may as well, when you've got a whole group of people who are together, you may as well have a look at how they came to faith and how that might help us. Number one, how many of you came to faith? Do put your hands up if you came to faith before the age of 18. Have a look around the room. Okay. Put your hand up if you came to faith over the age of 18. And now look around the room. Okay. Put your hand up if you came to faith after the age of 26. Now look around the room. Okay. Right. That's quite helpful, isn't it? Was that quite helpful? You've just discovered something statistical in the room. The most people come to faith before the age of 18. There's still a window of opportunity between 18 and 25, 26, which is why, although they're showing us very open now, that's always been the case. Because as a human being, so if you look at something called the British Attitudinal Studies Survey, you probably won't, but anyway, take my word for it. You can see like generational cohorts of belief that go through the system and how very little changes that generational cohort of belief. So a lot of people as human beings, we solidify in our views and our opinions and what we think about the world. And we've mostly done that brain growth, and those decision-making factors have been decided by about age 25, 26. And it takes a much bigger impact to help someone re-examine that than it does to form their view. So basically, as church leaders, everything that you do with somebody under the age of 18 is of vital importance. When we look at how we resource the church, when we look at what we are doing amongst those age brackets, everything we do with under 18s is of vital importance. We still have a big window, but I'm so sorry. Do you think you could jump to, where is it? To slide 35 for me. Slide 35. We're going to come back to the others in a minute. Keep going. Next one. Great. So this is the age at which we come to faith. So among practicing Christians, most of us are coming to faith either from birth or up to the age of 18. Some people are still coming to faith 19 to 24. From 25 up, it's not as many people are coming to faith. But there are two factors you need to say in this. Number one is, yes, most people are coming to faith here, but people of all generations can and do come to faith. So there's two messages out of this statistic. One is huge numbers of people come to faith under the age of 25 or under the age of 18, but all generations can come to faith. Okay? So you hold those two things in parallel. And that helps us to realise some of the things we need to do. Like when we run an external youth group and we're pulling in young people, it's a vital mission and evangelistic strategy. It's a vital mission and evangelistic strategy is to run a youth group with people with young people from outside of your church families. It's a vital mission strategy. And if we stop doing things like that, it will have a really big impact on church growth on church growth. Great. Stay with me. Now we're going to track all the way back to, so that's slide 36. We're going back to slide. I'd be from birth. I've just always been a Christian. I didn't make a decision. I didn't pray a prayer. I just grew up. Yeah, I know. I grew up in a Christian family. I was terrified as a brethren. I had to go see the elders before we got baptised, didn't we, Stephen? You remember. You go and have an interview about being a Christian. I was like, what am I going to tell them? I don't have a date. I don't have a time. I never prayed a prayer. And I remember Mr. Packer. And I said, oh, well, I don't have a date or a time or a prayer. And he said, Rachel, do you remember being physically born? I was like, silly question. I was like, no. But do you know you're physically alive? Yes. Do you remember being spiritually born? No. Do you know you're spiritually alive? Yes. Great. I'll remember that answer for the rest of my life. And I still remember it. So they're all in that category, because these are the practicing Christians. These are people who are regularly part of a worshiping community, reading their Bibles and praying. That's what this group is. These are our team. This is how the team have come to faith. But we're beginning to see the influence of everything we do with the younger years when we see this slide. But people of all ages do come to faith. Now, the 33% is about to turn up in slide 33. So we asked, and I think we only had 2% other, every possible key influence that could possibly bring a practicing someone to faith. And then people could tick more than one. So they were to tick their key influences which brought them to faith. Number one was growing up in a Christian family, but it's only 34%. So that's interesting, isn't it? So more than 34% of Christians came to faith under the age of 18. So a lot of them were not reached by growing up in a Christian family. They were reached by the church doing missional children and youth work. That's how we were reached. Do you see? So what that's showing me is only 34% were growing up in a Christian family, but a lot more than 34% came to faith in those younger years. And so we were doing something missional, focused to younger years. Great, still with me, good. Look at number 2. Da, 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 da. I mean, I sound like a dreadful salesman, but every time I see it, I'm just like, oh yeah, oh goodness, reading the Bible. So again, if you've got youth, this is NIVR. It's reading age 9 to 10. A young person can read this, they'll like the look and feel of it. Now, I remember reading Luke's Gospel in the Good News version. Do you remember those funny little pictures? And I read the life of Jesus for myself, and I remember the impact. And it was because it was given to me in a format that was easy, and I read it, and it was like, whoa, Jesus came alive. And I remember that in my early teen years. So I'm really convinced that every youth group, we could put the life of Jesus there. I sound crazy, but it's because statistically, it's really important. So I'm like completely wedded to that. Great. Attending a physical church service. Attending a physical church service. Not groundbreaking, but just remembering that some of what we do in church is bringing people to faith. In a normal church service. That's definitely what's happening in our church services. Some of the people who are coming are they're just rocking up. So one of the girls who was baptised was just saying on Easter Sunday, we had 2 girls, 2 guys, and an older couple. So we had a nice spread of ages. We had 2 young adult women, 2 young adult blokes, and an older couple who got baptised. 2 of the girls were in my life group. One of them, she walked in looking for a cafe and ended up in a Sunday church service. That's how she came to faith. One of the guys, I go, actually not that difficult, really. One of the guys, he was a convinced atheist. how on earth did he get here? He got there somehow to church. I have no idea. I must ask him how he got there. And then he's into YouTube. He has a big YouTube following because he's a gamer, computer gamer. And now he's still got a big YouTube follower, but he does YouTube following, and he's now not spouting atheism, he's now spouting Jesus. So he's now doing gaming and Jesus, and he's in the right place because he's on YouTube. So I'm just like, bless you, we'll support you, you keep going. Why don't you reach a whole generation of gaming people for Jesus? So he used to do atheism and gaming, and he now does Jesus. He now does, how did I get from atheism to Jesus, which is really attractive at the moment, people are really interested. How to get from atheism to Jesus and gaming. I read another guy who was an atheist, he was brought by, I think, a pretty friend, if I'm honest, who then actually didn't stay at church, but he stayed and he came to faith. We had 2 guys baptised last Sunday, really exciting, both in their 20s. One was brought by a friend from, his testimony was beautiful, one was brought by a friend from work, and the other, I can't remember how his sister came to faith in the church, and then his sister's boyfriend came to faith. They're both from Venezuela, and he's from Venezuela, and now he's come to faith. I love it because it's the air that we breathe. So we had 2 more we had 6 people baptised on Easter Sunday and 2 people baptised on Pentecost Sunday. Love it. And there's a big task of discipleship. Anyway, but normal church services are a great place and space. So also trying to help your church understand that it doesn't necessarily need to be an event. They could just bring them along to church, because watching people worship is jaw-dropping. You have to decide, are they all barking mad, or is something happening here? What is going on? What are we all doing? Is this real? I remember one time she brought her friend just to an all-night prayer and worship night. I'm like, well, why not? I mean, they're either going to think we're all barking mad, or they're going to ask some questions about what on earth is this group of people doing. It's actually, it has to be answered, doesn't it? Sunday school, you can see something here about intentional Sunday school. I love a spiritual experience. What was I thinking when I wrote that down? I have no idea. But anyway, a spiritual experience, we know again at the moment, you're probably hearing stories of people having dreams, visions, something just happened, and so they come to find us. We're hearing that on the grapevine more and more. Conversations with the Christian Union well. A life event, whether positive or negative, that's going to come up as very important in a minute. Responding to the gospel. We need to give people the chance to respond. Please put that back into what you do. So if you have forgotten to ask if anyone wants to follow Jesus, sometimes just people need the nudge. So they may have been on that long journey with you, but they need the ask. Okay, everybody, is there anybody here who wants to make a decision to follow Jesus? Yes, great. You 3, I'm now going to talk to you, and we're going to do whatever we need to do. So, food bank, anything that you're trying to get people, you're filtering out the people who are really interested, giving people an opportunity. Okay, what have we got next? Attending a church school. One of the girls who joined our church she brought herself along because she was convinced there was a God because she'd been to a Roman Catholic school. And so she came and found our church. And you're like, well, that wasn't difficult. But she had just gone to a church school, and all the opportunities we get going into church schools, you never know what's actually happening. So let's not give up on that whilst we still have an open door. I love visiting and praying in open church buildings when we're not there. 8%. Has anyone got a building they could open? I mean, again, it's not rocket science, is it? But I love it. They went and prayed, and guess who met them? Because they walked in the door. Yep.
Can I tell a story?
Yes.
Easter Sunday. So this is in the area that I live. This one guy, builder, had to go north, had some time to kill, decided, don't know why, to walk into a church. Went through the door for 45 minutes, cried.
Yeah.
What is going on? Came back, started talking to the vicar.
Yeah.
Deciding he's going to get confirmed. The vicar from the front said, got 2 people wanting to get confirmed, A and B. Could you stand up? Then you'll know who you want. We'll pray and bless you, etc., etc. Stood, and his friend stood up over the other side. So he walked over after the service to talk to him, and he said, well, what happened to you? He said, well, I was in Abergavenny. He said, no, I was dropping my daughter off at an event. And I had time to kill.
Wow.
And I walked into a church. And for 45 minutes, I just sat there weeping. Don't know what happened. And both of those incidents happened on Good Friday.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think it's like we saw the stats in 22, and it's like that these are the stories we're hearing. I mean, it's not us, is it? That's what's so hilarious. It's like, well, we had the church building open. We've had the church building open for a long time, but strangely, God has decided that He's just decided. This is it. It's the moment. And I do wonder if He's answering the prayers of the Black Church. Have you ever been to their prayer meetings to pray for our nation? 40,000 in the Excel through the night. They came, they believed, called, and they pray for the UK, and they've prayed for this. If you want to know where the boiler room is, their prayer meeting, and then they used to say to me, do you have anything like this? No, not exactly. We don't, I mean, if I called a prayer meeting, would 40,000 people rock up to pray through the night? But they do on a regular, all their family comes. The kids just sleep on the floor, wherever they are. It's amazing. But I feel, and it's almost like we're just seeing something, aren't we? And it's open church buildings. So I'm a bit like, open the building, see what God might do. Because people have still got just enough connection. There's still just a tenuous link. I had a woman on Sunday or Sunday before, so we'd finished church, and she walked in and sat on the back row. It was hardly any of us left. I thought, I will try and talk. I don't have time to talk to them all, which is hilariously bad, really. So I just thought I'd go sit down next to her, say, how are you? And then part way through the conversation, I thought, I just need to turn this to prayer. So I just moved it into prayer. She started crying. And I said, you just need to come back. And she'd been in a church in her 20s. She was now 50, 60. And she just walked past the door and something brought her in. And she said, what? She said, I can feel it. I said, yes. I said, we're doing a whole series on the Holy Spirit. I said, that is the tangible presence of God. And like when I just moved my speech into prayer, she started crying. She's like, what is this? I'm like, this is the Holy Spirit. And she's just like, it was amazing. And she just waltzed in and sat at the back row. I mean, nobody else was hardly in the building. Just had, they were, putting down the coffee. I love it. I just walked past and something drew me in. So open church buildings. You've got one, haven't you? Come on. Love it.
And on Sunday, we were baptising a 17-year-old.
Yes.
And that was the only baptism we had. I ended up being 3. One was a mother.
Wow.
3 children made a commitment to Jesus.
Yes.
Atheist friend of one being baptised said, I think I'm atheist, but not anymore. And other friend asked if she could be baptised.
I love it. Who else had baptisms this around Easter? Yep. Tell us what happened.
Well, it was the most strangest one we've ever done because we had to get a hoist because the lady who wanted to be baptised was non-mobile, so that was a kind of but with the amount of time it took us to gently put her into the pool and stuff like that, and the church was being very patient while this was going on, and the conversations we had about this afterwards and things like that. And we tried to have every Easter a baptism of some kind or other. And this was the first one which we had to do, really kind of get a huge pool, because to hoist them into the actual would have.
It's great. It's great, isn't it?
It was logistical nightmare, but it was a special time. So,
I don't do that. It's just like that. It's like I've been traveling around with this for that, but I'm beginning to hear more. I'm just beginning to hear more. I get the absolute joy and privilege of trotting about. So I'm just hearing more of this story, of that story, of this story, and then just seeing more. Just seeing more. I'm just like, it's almost like we haven't done that much different, but God's just decided to be. That I love it in Narnia, where you just suddenly see, don't you, winter going to spring, and they're like, Aslan's on the move. It's that God's just on the move. Yeah, you've got a story.
Two of the most passionate preachers
Yes.
Christian during lockdown.
Wow. Isn't that amazing?
Visiting a Christian who converted.
Yes. Yeah, my dad
They've got friends who they're trying to convert.
Yeah, my dad always talks to them because a whole JW family came out of the JWs because so many Christians talked to them. And my great grandmother, she used to just pray for them. So, like, my dad would be in conversation and she'd just come waltzing out the kitchen and try and put her hand on them. But they were in the early days of the Welsh revival. They'd been in the Welsh revival. They were just like, let me pray for you. It goes one way or the other. They either run off down the drive or something happens. So again, it's just like if they're there, we could have a conversation with every JW we saw, couldn't we? Really, when they stand there with free Bible course, that's great. What do you know about the Bible? This is what I know about the Bible.
So
yes.
These guys don't like what we're doing in our school community or our West Estate. They now have their own bungalow, which they call the Heathman.
Oh, I love it.
They love it because it's on public football, so they can talk to anyone.
Yes, and I bet you they're brilliant at it because they just know how to do it, don't they?
They're unbelievable.
I love it.
Yeah.
But there is something happening, and open church buildings. I'm a bit like, well, we could probably manage that, couldn't we? And then make sure there's a Mark's Gospel. What have we got? Youth clubs, Christian printed media, books, pamphlets, magazines. We're still into this because we can see that it's always a next step thing, isn't it? If somebody's trying to find out something more, can I give them a next step? And then on the back of that, we point people to Christianity.org because there is a real person there who will answer any of their questions. Cherry, she's amazing, and she will disciple people online all the way through. So if on the back of our literature we push them to somewhere, so you might read that, want to have another question, you can go there, you can then chat to Cherry, they don't know it's Cherry, online, and then she can bring people to faith all the way through online, and then she'll find them a local church. So that is a really good resource for the whole church. Or you can put it on the back of anything. If you're doing a Christmas card around your area, make sure that Christianity.org.uk, it doesn't have .uk, it goes somewhere weird, .uk is on the back because they'll find a real human being who will chat to them all the way through. Conversations with Christians you didn't know well, attending online church services, we haven't been doing them for that long, so that's a big stat. Going to an introductory course like Alpha, Christianity Explored, Christian content shared on social media, you're going to get that we did everything here. A church wedding or funeral online, a Christian union, a Christian media, Christian content shared on social media, introduction, individual churches outreach program, a university Christian union, new forms of church or other. I'm pleased to say we only got 2% other. Few. So we basically found most of the influences that brought people to faith. But remember, this is across the whole generation of spectrum. So some of these people are 65 and came to faith when they were 5. So you've got that whole spectrum of age and belief. So those stats will slowly change as new things do begin to show up in the stats. You see, there wasn't social media when they came to faith. Nobody was online when they came to faith because no one was online and we didn't even have the internet. So some of the logic behind, you have to think about each stat a little bit. Can't take a cup lunch. And then finally what we did, or I did, I went to sleep, I printed this and I wrote it all, wrote the report, and then realised that I hadn't broken out adults, but you've got one with adults because you've got the latest edition. So I broke out the top influences that bring adults to faith. So if you're working with an over 18, we're now on, going to skip age, next, this is one, yeah. What brings an adult to faith? And the number one thing is a life event. Just need to say that, a life event. So why is this important? We had a pandemic, we've had the war in Ukraine, we've got an economic crisis. Why have we moved from 1 in 5 to 1 in 3? Because we all nationally went through trauma. Whether we like it or not, that's actually what happened to us. The pandemic was a level of trauma for all of us. It was a life event. So we basically pushed adults into an uncomfortable space. That's what it did. So it's a bit like, you've got your life walked, you've got it all sorted, you know where you're going, but then when something brings the foundation, it wobbles it. Somebody dies. You move house, you give birth, you change where you're living. All these different things are moments when people will there's a moment in the wobbleness of their foundations of life. And when all of those compounded around the pandemic, there was lots going on at the same time. There's been a heightened interest and openness to the Christian faith. So basically, it's that statistic that is helping us to see what we're now seeing happening happening out there. Does that make sense? So it's the number one thing. So sometimes you can travel with a friend for a long time, but the parent dies. At that moment, you realise there is a real openness to the Christian faith. Because they won't have been open, but something has happened to them in their adult life that is allowing them to re-examine. So the bereavement journey, HTB's bereavement journey course, I don't know if any of you tried running that, absolutely brilliant. You do 6 weeks, which is just on bereavement, and the 7th week is optional on faith. Everybody stays for the optional week, because by that time they've grown into a group of people, and it works with bereaved people, and they are open because they have been bereaved. They are going to be asking about life and death. Someone they loved has gone, and they want answers, and they want to go on that journey. Then it's Christian family, then it's a physical church service, then it's a spiritual experience. Let's just keep praying that people walk into churches and cry. Then it's reading the Bible, hurrah! And then it's, what we got? Conversations, which we know, responding to the gospel, and then other Christian printed media. So that's why we're still doing this. This is Hope in Hard Times. We also have it in Welsh, probably not that useful here. So Hope in Hard Times is just what it says on the tin, Hope in Hard Times, because people will pick that up in a cafe. This one I did for last Christmas, and we're doing it again this Christmas. This is Explains Christmas. But it's Gold Hill Baptist, Stephen Walker Williams. He ordered these last year. He never got a copy himself because they were too popular. And he said it was the non-Christians coming back to the church to ask for more copies for their non-Christian friends. Because actually people want to understand Christmas, because there is a spiritual hunger, and I feel that there is a hunger for our rootedness back in things like the Christian faith, that people, they don't want their children to grow up thinking Christmas is only about Father Christmas. And so they're desperate. So this just explains that there's a verse, and it's got a lovely little prayer at the end, which helps people to earth it. If they really want to experience Christmas, there is a prayer. And that's because we know experience and encounter is important. I think many people will read the prayer because they are looking for something. So he never got a copy. So this year he's hoping to actually get a copy himself. But that's why we're still committed to it. And again, if you're forward thinking, Nigel, you could put some of those on your order, because you can just put, if you buy them on the bulk, then they're a lot cheaper, and they come on that delivery, it's a lot cheaper. But if you want something for Christmas, that would work really well. And why is that working really well? So think about some of the life event things that happen to people. One of the key ones is giving birth. Not to all of us, but some people. And if you look at their younger age bracket normally, they give birth, that's a big life event, and you're still in that, maybe in that flux, a little bit of flux still of deciding what you think. How many parents of children under the age of 5 would be in touch with any church in the UK? Buzz with the person next to you and try and guess. Or is it already up? No, it's not. Good. How many parents with a child under the age of 5 are in touch with the church? Are you ready? Big reveal, Emily. Right, so 12% are practicing Christians, but 62% of all of the parents with a child under the age of 5 are in fringe parents. So that's a whopping 74% reach of one bracket of society that we have. And it's where everything coincides. It's age and life event, all coinciding. It's also often you geographically root, you want to build community, you go to the toddler group, you've had this child, you're not sure which way's up, you're looking for community, you're looking for something of God, and you rock up at the toddler group and they give you a custard cream. And actually, sometimes we forget to mention Jesus. But actually, they are willing. I'm just going to say this. We've got shed loads of research if you need to convince your toddler group leaders. So we run a network online for toddler group leaders called Talking Toddlers. It happens once a term, and we run it with the EA, and it's all about making this one of the biggest, because if you had to ask me where should I start, I did I worked with a whole pile of church planters in a kind of which church network. They're like, out of all this research, Rachel, where would you start if you were planting a church? I looked at them and thought, they're not going to like this, but a toddler group. That's where I'd start, because all of these things coincide in the toddler group. The life event, the age bracket, the need to find out more. So I would start with a toddler group. And we found out that when you do the toddler group, so you've got this like 12, so we've got more than, they're batting above their average on practicing Christians as well. So more people with a child under the age of 5 are going to be an active practicing Christian, part of our church, Bible reading, prayer. Then you've got this massive fringe group, of which many of them are coming regularly to something. And so you've got this massive opportunity. Next slide for me. When they attend, more than half of fringe parents say that attending activities help them to explore their own beliefs. So that's that big fringe group. Half of them, over half of them, if we're being intentionally Christian, will examine their own beliefs. Well, we could do that, couldn't we? And then you're going to love it. I'm not going to do the next slide. The other one I was looking for, which I obviously haven't put in here, of the third, can we go back to slide 38? No, the one with the percentages, this one. That 25%, a third of them would like an invite. That has got to be hilarious, hasn't it? So we've already got 74%, but of the remaining 25% who we don't have contact with, 1/3 of them said that they would like an invite to something run by the church for them and their child. This is called Talking Toddlers. You'll also find a rundown of all that research. So if you go to the Hope Together YouTube site, you will find a 2-minute animation on all the Talking Jesus stats that you can show in church. You'll find a 15-minute me unpacking. I mean, you've had me for 3 hours, but hey, you could have had it in 15 minutes. Sorry about that. You'll find a 15-minute unpack of Talking Jesus. You'll also find about 20 minutes unpack of Talking Toddlers, which will give you all the headlines on this. Basically, we can really be distinctively Christian when we are dealing with parents with children under the age of 5. They are desperately looking for help. So with all that knowledge, I'm on a train from, anyway, one Christian festival to another Christian festival with that suitcase. Half of the suitcase is all books and stuff. And I'm sitting there and I've got this in my suitcase. And onto the train marches a couple with a small child. And my brain goes, statistically speaking, you're really open to Jesus. I should give you something. And I should start commenting, oh, I'm really tired. I've been at Focus. I'm exhausted. Rachel, statistically speaking, they're really, I know, if I give them one of my books, they're going to think I'm really weird. You know the conversation you have. Rachel, she's now craning the train walls. That's how things are getting. I think you should give us that. So I pull out of my book and I say, how about, have you ever, this is a Bible story for your child. Would you like it for her? Oh, yes, we'd love that. So I sit there and I read Twinkle Toes all about, oh, look, can you see the zebra? Can you see the giraffe? This is Mr. Noah. He built a boat. So I read this child on the train, Noah. And the dad looks at me and he goes, it's very strange we should meet you today. Because 2 weeks ago, for the first time in our lives, we decided as a family that we should go to church. So he said, we went to a church near us. We just went, and we'd never been before. He said, it was great. I was like, oh my word. You know, you're just like, we wonder how that experience went. And he goes, no, she does whoop after every song because that's what she does at nursery, but they seem to cope with that. Oh, phew, nobody frowned. And he said, you know, he said, it's just so strange. He said, it's just the pandemic made me ask questions. And then we had our daughter. And he said, this is what his words, I just thought, what if there is a God? Because if there is a God, I want her to have the chance to know that God. And I know that I don't know, so I can't help. So I thought I should take her to church. I mean, he was like, I should film you. You're statistically perfect. He's statistically perfect. So if you really want to up the ante on getting the best possible result, start a toddler group. And if you've got some people running a toddler group in your church, cheer them on, back them, give them everything they've got, rock up yourself, get in there and have evangelistic conversations. You could bring many of them to faith just by rocking up and being there week in, week out, offering to pray, then take a group of them out on an alive course of wellbeing. I don't mind what you use, but offer that. And then say, look, we've got childcare. You can come on Thursday morning. We'll be running this. 3 people will be running the childcare. They'll just be there. We'll be over here and we'll look at this. And then we work with the Entertainer Toy store and the Early Learning Centre. Amazing man who runs that. If you're going to buy a toy, please buy it there and support an incredible Christian businessman who's given us the right to use the Happy Land characters to talk to under 5s and help them find Jesus. At the same time, their parents do. Isn't that interesting? So we're going God's big story, Genesis to Revelation. We've done Genesis and Revelation, the bookmarks. We've done the Easter one is beautiful. It's just beautiful. Jesus fixes things. If you want to track for the under 5s, it's Jesus fixes things. And they all have an animation so people can watch it on their phone and a song if you like actions. And they're just, it's a brilliant age bracket to work with. And these, again, you might have to get Nigel to order those in Job Lot, because what we're trying to do is resource toddler groups to be distinctively Christian. It's fine to do the wheels on the bus, but whilst you're doing the wheels on the bus, also please do, God washes the world in song, because you can learn a whole raft of action songs to go through the Bible with your toddlers. And then they will, instead of when they're old remembering the wheels on the bus, they're going to know, Jesus fixes things. And I don't know I probably learned to pray as I learned to speak. Why can't we reach? At the moment, we have a chance of reaching 74% of every under 5-year-old in the country.
We haven't got anyone who can run a toddler group.
Yeah. But maybe you drop something else. You don't have to be have a toddler-age child. Maybe we have to drop running a church service and say, drastic, and say, I'm so sorry, because what we need to do is reach this generation. So I am going to go and do this. I know that's how one big church managed to get volunteers for their kids' work. They said, we are no longer going to be part of running Sunday church because we will be running the children's work church until we get some volunteers. It worked. So there's a thought, radical, but there's a thought. So if it's that important, it's like, where do we go? And you might be like, I remember all these pioneer people who wanted to do, they want to do something funky. I don't want to run a toddler group. They looked at me in horror when I said, what would you do? I said, run a toddler group. They're like, oh, I don't want to do that. I wanted you to tell me something really exciting. But actually, Wheels on the Bus and Noah, great, because we could help and then we've got a third of that group who just want an invite. They'll be happy if you invite them on Facebook. We've even asked how they wanted to be invited. We could almost reach one whole generation for Jesus. We wouldn't be having this conversation in 20 years' time. If they all had an experience, a genuine experience, where they learned how to pray, where they knew Jesus was their best friend, and they grew up with that, think how amazing that would be. But we could do it. We could do it. Is it within our reach? Yes.
We have 2 toddler groups.
Brilliant.
Monday and Friday. They're quite popular. Parents inviting each other. They're really open.
Yeah.
For conversation, but something else. We have a Talks for Dads on Saturday once a month.
Lovely.
And last few months we have 35 dads.
Yes. Yeah.
Really easy. And all of them, and we always have Christian stories.
Great.
A prayer box in the corner. We always invite them to different things.
Yeah.
Messages. They work really
Yeah.
well. I don't mean to air all of them. Many of them will come to Sunday to church.
Yep. No.
That's their community.
Yeah, that's their church.
Yes, that's their
I know Jan, who we talked about, he runs a dad's club on Saturdays, once a month, dad's club, and that's really popular. And loads of dads come with their kids every Saturday, once a month, every Saturday. They all rock up and they do Christian stuff with their kids, as well as, let's go and kick a football round. But it's a really, what I'm just trying to say is, this is like a massive, massive open goal that we just have to try and line up and shoot. It's a bit like we miss the obvious, isn't it? We make it really complicated, and it's not complicated. It is hard work, and you do have to turn up. It's like, running a life group, isn't it? You don't have to cook for all these people every week. But then you see that little moment of worthwhile when you're reading the Bible with someone. So I'm now just going to spin through a few. Where are we? Let me just check. So you've seen nearly everything, I think. We are on slide 41. Slide 41, what have we got there? So that's alive, find out about that Easter. Slide 42, that was me stenciling. Slide 43, what have we got now? That's Mark. Yeah, we've got a Bible, we love the Bible. Slide 44, this is because I forget to tell people where it is. That is our website, and that's where you find things. Slide 45, I don't know if it may not, but this is the Talking Jesus trailer. You could press click, but it may not click. Okay, don't press click, it won't work at all. So don't worry about that. That is a Talking Jesus course that you can run in your life groups to get everyone talking about their faith. Then we're going to go slide 47, 48, and then we're going to go back to 46. So slide 47. Next slide. We had just produced this, which is all about how to, again, trying to use new words to explain. It's about to go to print. It'll be about how you were formed, how you've been broken, how you can be healed and restored. It's a bit of a how to take people through thing, but done in a beautiful illustrated way, and it will look beautiful and it'll be on quality paper to help people to understand, in a way, the Christian gospel in as simple form as we can manage it. And then this is what I've promised to show you, the next slide. You just have to write this down if you've got a pen. So, the Talking Jesus trailer has just started playing on here, interestingly enough. But we're not going to do that now. So this is, I told you that I just feel like you should all watch Johannes Hartl from the HTB Leadership Conference. And that is the best way I could get it to you. That's hysterical, isn't it? But anyway, better than not. The reason watching him is that's that understanding of what reality used to be, what reality now is, why people defining reality themselves as an individual is failing them so much, and then the brokenness, the isolation, the anxiety, what's coming out of all those things because they've got this pressure to define. Basically, they've been told they're God. So if you remember, God was external, and therefore right and wrong were external. Then if you make God interior and inside you, it's a disaster because you're trying to define yourself. You're trying to be God. It will actually leave you isolated, broken, and with high levels of anxiety, which we're seeing right across our society. But he does a much better job than me, and he draws it all on, one of those people who's very clever, draws it all on a whiteboard or a blackboard. It's super. But just watch it, because I was like, all of us who are trying to explain the good news of Jesus Christ in a modern world, he's done a lot of thinking on it, and it will help you when you are in a conversation with somebody to explain the good news of Jesus. We're coming into land. The next slide, if you've all got that, this is where you can find the Talking Jesus course, and you can find downloads of the research, you can find the animation, and other resources. That's the Talking Jesus site. The next one, I've already said, sign up to our e-news, because then at least you'll stay in touch. You don't have to read it all the time. Final slide. Yay! Great! Any questions? Yeah. Any questions? Great, good. We'll all go away and do all that, shall we? Any questions? Anything you really want clarified? Yeah.
Well, this isn't a daft question, after all. So what you've said today is really inspiring for us.
Yes.
How would you suggest that, so if we are like, ministers
yes.
of various churches, or church leaders of various churches, how would you best suggest that we might try to inspire our people so that it's not just us who are getting it,
Yeah. So there's a whole scale. The number one is a 2-minute animation. So you can find that on our YouTube site or the Talking Jesus. So on Hope Together YouTube, 2-minute animation, you can blitz that out on a Sunday morning. And you'll see who's like, oh, you can see who's interested. Your leaders, you could do the 15-minute YouTube of me chatting about this, because you'll help the leaders to get at least an overall grasp in their busy lives, and you can download the report. Thirdly, the whole PowerPoint is there for you. So you can take this away, you can pull any of the slides out, and you can talk to anybody that you want to on any of it. And that would be wonderful, because that will work really well because you know them. So pull it apart, take the slides you want. Then you can run the Talking Jesus course, which the trailer I would have played you, but if you have a look on the Talking Jesus website, you'll see the trailer. It's really well filmed. It's 6 weeks. It gets people talking about their faith, so you know that. And finally, if you really wanted to, and you think you might all invite people from your church, I would even come back. It's not that far from London. So if you were like, who else needs to know? Everybody that I can think of, then I'll come back and you can just invite people. So you could show them the animation. We don't have to do 3 hours either, because they're not leaders. Well, they're leaders, but they might have different needs and requirements. So we could truncate this down and do something shorter and sharper for a group of people. And I'm really willing to come back if that would help you. Any or all? 2-minute animation, first of all.
Good answer.
Good answer, yeah. Thorough answer. Thorough answer. Anything else? Great. Why don't we, in the last few minutes, turn around our tables and pray? I honestly think, I'm going to go back to Matthew 8. Jesus was right, wasn't he? I love it when Jesus is right, don't you? It's always helpful. So he saw the crowds and he had compassion because they were harassed, they were helpless, they were sheep without a shepherd. This isn't about our need to grow. This is about shepherding the people around us. They are actually quite desperate. And the things that they've been told will bring them life are not working. And they really have seen that they are empty and they are hungry. And we know now that the harvest is plentiful. So let's just pray.